and again, something looks singularly uniquely Feddy, such that it warrants being called Feddy. Behold!
All right, here we are with the Patriot Front in front of the Washington Monument. Hey, are any guys speaking up on the record here? What do you guys think of Kash Patel for FBI director? Anybody? What do you guys think of Kash Patel for FBI director? Anyone? Kash Patel? Any thoughts? Any of you guys able to speak through those face diapers? Kash Patel for FBI director, any thoughts? My dude behind the banner, what do you think? All right. Anybody?
We're not going to go through the full five.
What do you think of Kash Patel for FBI director?
I don't know. Why?
I'm just wondering. I think it's a good question. You know,
I don't like the FBI. I think it's a largely illegitimate branch of law enforcement. And Kash Patel is probably, I'm not really familiar with his background. He is Indian, though. I don't think Indians should be in charge of any of the departments of government of the United States. So there you go. Because he's a foreign.
He's not a foreigner. He's born in America.
Yeah, but he's Indian. Plenty of people are born in America.
What about your ancestors?
They're American.
Yeah.
Yes.
Born in America.
Yes.
But where did they come from originally?
See, actually, just being born in America doesn't make you an American.
Born in America to second generation.
We're gonna stop here. This is a group called the Patriot Front that shows their faces every now and again and partook in some call it protesting on the 4th of July. We've seen this entity a couple of times, and they reek of some form of feddiness, Feddiness. And it's, what that term means these days. Are they an operation to make the far right look stupid, look bad, look racist? Who knows? Is it an operation or useful idiots that are being exploited for photo ops so that they can come out with the photos that New York Post refers to as chilling? This is, by the way, if you've had any doubts about the New York Post and whether or not it's journalism anymore, if you don't understand the distinction between journalism and editorialism, you'll be easily duped in life. There is a difference, which is reporting on the news versus editorializing on the news. And there's nothing wrong with editorializing. I mean, to some extent, it's what I do, comment on the news. But when you're a news outlet and you run these rubbish headlines, chilling photo shows black woman on DC train surrounded by white supremacist thugs. Who can understand and identify what the editorialized comments are there? One would be chilling. Shows black woman on train surrounded by white supremacist thugs. Thug would be the major qualifier there, because thugs would imply that they've engaged in some form of thuggery, some sort of abuse, bullying, intimidation. What did they do? Other than wearing face masks and refuse to engage with someone asking them pretty decent open-ended questions? Washington, a now viral photo, shows the chilling moment a black woman is stuck on a DC train surrounded by masked thugs from a white supremacist group as they descend on the nation's capital. July 4. 400 of them descend. Let me bring this out for 1 second. And I say it's Feddy, or it's something of a false flaggy, or it's a bunch of who knows whom intending to make a group, conservatives, far right, look like idiots. I understand the argument for why people say they need to wear masks. They don't want to get identified and fired from their jobs. Okay. First of all, that is not the quintessential defining element of the right, conservatives, people even on the far right. They're quite proud of what they believe, and they're quite proud to be labeled whatever they're labeled. We're not really living in a world right now where people are getting fired for being conservatives, and I doubt very much that the majority of these people, or at least I would question whether or not they are working in industries that are so politically oriented that they would get fired or otherwise sanctioned for being right-wing, conservative, far right. The only people in my experience, or I say the vast majority of the people, the groups that wear face masks to cover their identities in public, and then also simultaneously refuse to engage in any discourse, are lefty Antifa lunatic types. The types who show up to a protest and either sit there and scream idiocy over and over again, but don't engage, or the ones who won't engage, much like the lefty lunatic losers in the Ottawa trucker protest who wouldn't engage with me. They show up to protest. Some of them were covering their faces. I was, a little uncomfortable around those. They show up to a protest and then refuse to engage. What the hell's the point in showing up to the protest? So when we see these guys marching in unison like there's some sort of far-right militia, wearing masks in public because they don't want to get fired or whatever, it looks suspicious. It sounds suspicious. And when you get this moment, this viral photograph that the New York Post can then run with to demonize these groups, or by extension, people who are far right, you might understand that this looks and smells like an operation of sorts. Freelance photographer who happened to be there, Cheney Orr, captured the eerie 250th Independence Day moment that some observers argue is symbolic of the nation's struggle to live up to its promises. If you were a far-right group and you wanted to make the 250th anniversary look bad, what would you do differently? They're showing up on a train. First of all, how do they even do they pick the train with one single passenger who happens to be black? And then they capture this moment. It's too convenient. It's an orgy of defamatory, besmirching rhetoric that allows for this to happen. And the group itself looks quite foolish. The woman hasn't been identified. It's not clear she interacted with the Patriot Front members during the riot. Hundreds of members of the Patriot Front wore masks, khakis, sunglasses, and hats to the Capitol. Some of them paraded around upside-down American flags, and others carried Confederate flags as they marched through D.C. And then you have this. I forget when we last talked about it, where they said that it looks ridiculous. It looks like they are out to make people look stupid and bad. And lo and behold, they got a media to run with the photo. They got the photo, and they've got the bad press for the right on the 250th, on the 4th of July, which is supposed to celebrate American greatness. And now you have mainstream crap outlets like the New York Post using this setup as a pretext to besmirch the far right, the conservatives, the people who arguably, but not arguably, are the conservative element that are actually trying to conserve what it means to be American and what America means to the rest of the world. They got their viral photo. It looks idiotic every time they appear out of the blue. They embarrass the right. And if their goal was to stand up for something, and every time they appear, they give fodder to an adverse, negative media, if everything they do to allegedly, purportedly promote their goals actually undermines it, if it's for real, then you might want to reflect on what you're doing. And the idea that they have to wear face masks so they don't get exposed and whatever, we're not really in that realm anymore. And they're not doing anything in any event other than being part of some militia that might warrant any form of sanction in the real world. Not warrant, rather, but might solicit or elicit any form of sanction in the real world. Law enforcement wear masks more than any other group. Protest groups of all kinds began wearing bandanas as a result of the test gas being used for crowd control. I personally don't think you should be able to wear a face mask when protesting in public, because it's just a recipe for criminality. And some people will say free speech and yada, yada. You want to protest in public venues and you wear face masks when it inevitably is abused for criminality. The irony is, during COVID, when they were requiring face masks and people were saying this violates my freedom of speech, and obviously that does, wearing face masks in public, and then they exempted Black Americans, or at least they tried to pass some sort of law exception to the face masks to marginalize groups. But the bottom line, you show up to a protest wearing a face mask, at some point, your freedom to express yourself it has to meet a certain line with the ability to go incognito when you smash, bash, and break windows, and then nobody can identify who did it, but they get to blame it on the other side. People, Patriot Front, you tell me what you think. It reeks of some sort of operation to discredit the so-called far right. And alas, that's exactly what has happened. Now, how goes the battle, people? It's Sunday night. You may notice I'm in another backdrop right now. We've been living out of our car for a little while, and it's great. At least I think I've got good internet connection here. And we're having our Sunday show, and it's going to be a banger because we're going over all the SCOTUS decisions that came out last week. I go out road tripping, and then SCOTUS comes down with How 12 decisions? Holy crab apples. We are live on Rumble. We are live on CommyTube for the Sunday show. We're live on X, and we are live on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. In fact, now that I remind myself, hold on a second, I got to go to CommyTube, and I've got to do one quick thing because I got to make sure that I have it up so that I can get any super chats that come through. And while I do this, everybody, if you want to support the channel, you know how to do it. Super chats, Rumble rants. You can join our community at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. If I miss any of the super chats on CommyTube in particular, because I'm not following that chat as much, if you're going to be miffed or whatever, even if it's a Rumble rant, don't give it. I don't like people feeling miffed, grifted, shilled, whatever. If I don't read their Rumble rant, it's also not an obligation for me to read it, if depending on what it says. But I thank everybody for the support. If you want to support the channel, go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. That is the best place to support the work that Robert Barnes and I do. I see someone asking if I'm in a sauna. I'm not in a sauna. Just had to pick like the least distracting corner of a room. And over on Rumble, MK Telephone Man says, if you carry a cell phone, your mask is stupid. We're going to talk about it tonight with the geofencing that was declared unlawful in a case that's particularly interesting. And let me just see what's going on in our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community. We're going to get to all the tipped questions in Viva Barnes Law in the after party, get to all the Rumble rants in due course. I want to cover one story that I meant to cover yesterday on the 4th of July, but in the heat of the moment and the excitedness of it, I didn't get to it, and I had it on the backdrop. Let's see what's going on here. What is this beautiful albino squirrel? Or it's a rat? Unclear. Let me make sure that Barnes is here. Has he got the link? I know he's got the link. I want to cover one story before he gets on because it's pure Canada. Ready when you are, but doing the quick Canadian story. People, how bad are things in Canada? A while back, people seem to have forgotten there was a government report indicating that by the year 2040, Canadians may be forced to forage for alternative means of subsistence. That's how bad things are looking in Canada. That's how dire things are looking in Canada. And we'll get to that in a second. And when you remember things and then you connect certain dots, or at least you connect dots that might connect or might not connect, but there's dots out there, you start to realize that this thing that they call persuasion, when movies come out, like The Age of Disclosure, movies come out that start talking about things that are in the news, and the idea is that it's sort of getting society ready to deal with what might be coming, and so they go by way of fiction to get people psychologically prepared for what the powers that be know is coming. Mainstream media does the same thing. Persuasion, pre-bunking, they do the same thing. And an article came out, when was it, like a week ago? In CTV News. Now, it's probably, in fairness to CTV News, yes, it's a Reuters affiliated article. July 1st, so less than a week ago, this is a real article out of CTV News letting you know that cannibalism is bad for your health, scientists say. Let me just back this out for 1 second. You read that right. This is an article, a headline, coming from Reuters, covered in CTV News. It made its rounds everywhere. But CTV News comes out and says, eating other humans might be bad for your health. Now, scientists say, by the way, I mean, this is like the one time where they're going to try to get, people on the right, the anti-vaxxers, to say, I don't agree with those scientists. Eating people is good for you. That might be part of the operation. I don't think it is. It's a known fact that the higher up in the food chain you go when it comes to carnivores in particular, the more risks come with consuming that meat. One of the reasons you eat bears, it's not necessarily because they're on the higher end of the carnivorous food chain. Things that eat garbage, sometimes their organs tend to process those toxins, and if you eat those organs, you get in big trouble. When it comes to animals that are higher up the food chain, the concentration of heavy metals necessarily goes up as you ascend that food chain. So you eat marlin, you eat tuna, they eat smaller fish, those smaller fish ate smaller fish or krill, whatever, and mercury, etc., goes up the food chain, gets concentrated in the flesh of the bigger animals on the food chain, and it makes it a little bit riskier to eat them. And that's why you're not supposed to eat too much tuna, because it contains mercury. I'm not sure if that's exactly why you're not supposed to eat the liver from bears, which I think contains vitamin K or lethal levels of vitamin K. When you eat other carnivores, it gets even worse. And if anybody wants to look for the historical explanation for the rules of kashrut or the rules of halal, where certain animals you shouldn't eat, that's one of the reasons. You can eat certain birds, but not the carnivorous birds. You can eat chickens, you can eat pheasants, but you shouldn't eat crow, which eat meat and whatever else. And that's the reason why. But in the revelation of the day, cannibalism is bad for your health. Warsaw. Cannibalism became taboo in human societies not out of instinctive aversion, but because it is harmful to populations who practice it, scientists from Poland and the Czech Republic have found. Michael Miziak of the University of Wrocław and Peter Truczek, Charles University in Prague, used a mathematical model to show that the long-term practice of cannibalism can lead to population collapse by causing illness in those who eat other people. We looked at the human body as a potential source of food, analyzing both energy gains and hidden costs. Well, from a caloric perspective, the energy gains are about the same. From the hidden cost, yeah, there's a problem. Pathogens have an easier task because they end up in an organism with almost identical physiology. Their model shows the risk of disease rises exponentially when cannibals consume other cannibals, as even cooking does not eliminate prions or misfolded proteins that can cause fatal neurological disease, like mad cow disease. Except it's going to be like, I guess if you eat a crazy person, I was going to make another joke, like you eat your crazy mother-in-law and then you get mad cow disease. Bada bing, bada boom. This is common sense stuff. And then the question is, why in the name of sweet holy hell is this coming out right now? I talked about that article back. It wasn't an article, it was a study. And you remember it because we covered it at the time. It was a study from the Policy Horizons Canada. This is from the government of Canada. It's a website, their website. It was published in January 2025. Future Lives, Social Mobility in Question. Go to section 3.4 because I remember this, by the way. Because of issues, well, let's read the introductory paragraph. Introduction. Social mobility lies at the heart of the Canadian project. Many people in Canada assume that, quote, following the rules, end quote, and doing the right things, end quote, will lead to a better life. Anyone can get an education, work harder, buy property, and climb the social economic ladder. This is an informal but powerful promise. However, things are changing. Wealth inequality is rising. Children are already less upwardly mobile than their parents. Policy Horizons has explored some of these changes in Future Lives, Basic Needs. More recently, the Disruptions on the Horizon 2024 report suggests that downward social mobility might become the norm in the future. Understand what that means, people. Things might be getting worse going forward in Canada. What's the solution to that? Double the population, increase immigration, open the borders, and, especially take them in from countries like India, Pakistan, China, Nigeria, all those other countries that undoubtedly have similar values and are totally compatible with Western societies in Canada in particular. That'll solve the problem. Keep going here. Where was I? Downward mobility. The scenario below paints a picture of Canada in 2040 in which most Canadians find themselves stuck in the socioeconomic conditions of their birth, and many face a very real possibility of downward social mobility. While this is neither the desired nor the preferred future, Policy Horizons strategic foresight suggests it is plausible. Thinking about future scenarios helps decision makers understand some of the forces already influencing their policy environment. It can also help some test the future readiness of assumptions built into today's policies and programs. Finally, it helps identify opportunities, yada, yada, yada. Go down to section 3.4. People might find alternative ways to meet their basic needs. Housing, food, childcare, and healthcare cooperatives may become more common. Communism. This could ease the burdens of social services, but also challenge market-based initiatives. They're talking about communism. Literally. The state owns and raises your children. So you're getting communism. What else? Forms of person-to-person exchange of food, good, services could become even more popular, reducing tax revenues and consumer safety. So people are going to start bartering more. It's going to hurt the state because they're not going to get their tax dollars off of it. Oh, yeah, and consumer safety. So communism, bartering. What else is in the future of Canada? People may start to hunt, fish, forage on public lands and waterways without reference to regulations. Small-scale agriculture could increase. People might become more independent, or they're going to start hunting for rats and squirrels to eat those things. Governments may seem to become irrelevant if they cannot enforce basic regulations, or if people increasingly rely on grassroots solutions to meet basic needs. People may start to hunt, forage, etc. While you fall into that future, Canada, just remember, go for the rats, go for the squirrels, don't eat their brains. Go look up the guy who died from eating squirrel brains. I think he probably got something like mad cow disease. Go forage, illegally hunt and harvest, although it's already going on in Canada. Just don't eat each other. You can hunt and forage on your neighbor's property, but just don't eat your neighbor. Don't go full Alex Jones and eat your neighbor's ass because it's bad for you. But at the end of the day, I Googled this. This is just hilarious. I want to see what countries, in what countries cannibalism is most prevalent. And it's pretty much illegal everywhere. But I did notice something very interesting as I looked it up. Where was it here? Where was it? This one here? Are we looking at the right one here? Yeah, no recognized country legally permits or openly practices cannibalism. That's fine, of course not. I know that. Papua New Guinea, I knew it. You don't go there, people. Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, West Papua. And then this is very interesting. War zones and geopolitical crises. In extreme situations of societal collapse, armed conflict, and intense famine. Why is it doing that? Illegal acts of cannibalism have been documented by international bodies. Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. I think they also, North Korea, there you go. During severe systemic famine crises, most notably in the 1990s, underground reports smuggled out of the country indicated isolated incidents of survival cannibalism. If you think that's not what is being primed with this article, in conjunction with government reports as to the dire situation of Canada, in as near a future as 2040, maybe you disagree with me connecting those dots, but ich bin connecting those dots. And that's what's going on in Canada, people. Now, I see Barnes in the back, but his screen looks black. While he figures out, I don't know if Barnes is boomering, let me see what we got going on in our Viva Barnes Law. No, we're going to go to Rumble for a second. And speak of the devil and he shall appear. Barnes is going to come up in a second. After the SCOTUS rulings, I've come to the realization that my vote in Arizona won't count. I'm sure there will be a record number of mail-in ballots in the coming elections. It seems insurmountable. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't show that. Yeah, well, we're going to get into the election day. Can go on for 5 days after election if they're post-dated, postmarked before the election day. And then, the obvious question is to why only 5 days, or why as many as 5 days? We'll find out in a second. Let me see if Barnes is having if he's having a problem here. I see you. Are you having difficulty coming in? ? I think Barnes and I are both on the road, and Barnes is a bit more of a boomer than I am. Let's see what's going on. Okay, and oh wait, I see him coming. Well, his camera's muted. Before we do that, we'll go into Viva Barnes Law.locals.com. Get to some of the tip questions there real quick. Oh no, there he is. Oh my goodness, people. Robert, tilt your computer screen down. I see it on the bottom.
Yeah, I don't know what the issue there is. Yeah.
Oh no, you can just tilt it. Oh, there you go. Barnes, you realize there's going to be more memes of you tomorrow than there are of Owen Schroyer with his new hairdo?
I picked this up yesterday on the way to get some fireworks for a little family get-together here in Tennessee.
The only thing that would make that hat better is if it were edible and you could just peel off pieces and eat them. If it was marshmallow or something. Robert, how goes the battle?
Good. We got a stacked SCOTUS. We got good SCOTUS, bad SCOTUS once again. A particular justice, surprised some people on the right. Wouldn't have surprised them if they would have paid attention to what we talked about before she was nominated. We'll get to some of the decisions he was a key vote on, particularly the top topic of the SCOTUS decisions this past week. No favorite was the top topic, but right behind that was birthright citizenship. So we'll get to the birthright citizenship case. We'll get into the Federal Reserve case. We'll get into the right to fire government bureaucrats case, the Fourth Amendment and geofence warrants case, the range of denials of cert on vaccine mandates, on qualified immunity, on free speech on school campuses, and a few of those cases as well. The plus there was a good case on men and women's sports and its meaning and interpretation and application in the Title IX and equal protection context. We've got good news from the investigative research, not yet on the legal side, on the very good work that Steve Baker and others are doing on the January 6th pipe bomber. And we'll conclude the show with a 250th quarter millennial anniversary of our Declaration of Independence here in the United States of America. Where's some of the weak links in the current application and enforcement of the ideas and ideals in that Declaration of Independence in the modern era? Do we have some of the same complaints that our founding generation had? What does it mean to be a part of the founding generation? Where did they go consistent and AWOL in the final 2 weeks of the SCOTUS term? So that and more this week on the July 5th version of Law for the People.
How was it, before we even get into it, we'll start with Steve Baker, then we'll go over all of the. And by the way, thank you for reminding me. I said the interview with Steve Baker was on Wednesday. I'm an idiot. It's tomorrow. So tomorrow it might be 3:15 because I'm going to do 3 hours on Megyn Kelly. We're going to watch the Tyler Robinson evidentiary hearing, or at least cover it in real time with some other stuff. I'm fairly certain it's being broadcast, but so I'll be on with Megyn Kelly from noon to 3. Baker's coming on at 3:15 tomorrow, not Wednesday, and we're going to talk about his latest expose. Before we even get into that, Robert, how was the 4th of July in you were in Tennessee or in Chattanooga?
Yeah. I got back here in the new house, got the old studio back set up. I may have to replace this particular computer because it tends to be some of the issues rather than the others, because the internet's like super fast, though it got knocked out this week. We had crazy thunderstorms here in Chattanooga. Back home and set up in the new house.
Were there good fireworks shows?
Well, I went out to some friends and family, and they did a bunch. And little grandson was all he kept talking about: fireworks. And then they blew up right in front of him, and he ran to his mom. So he went all excited to be like, "Holy moly!"
I was watching some of the funniest epic fireworks fails of all time. Not the ones where people get their hands blown off, just the funny ones. But yeah, I didn't read any articles yet of people dying by getting blown in the face with the M1500s. Robert, Steve Baker was on with Tucker Carlson. It was a 2-hour and change podcast interview. It was great. I think everybody, in response to my coverage of it, said they were going to go watch it if they hadn't already done it. He then also went on with Kyle Seraphin for over 3 hours of the next day to go into more detail about many of the elements that he discussed with Tucker Carlson. But the biggest of these elements, and going to the theory that Brian Cole Jr., he's a patsy, period, because I don't think anybody believes that even if he were involved, he was the one that planted the pipe bombs, if only because of his body. I don't think anybody really denies that what Steve Baker discovered by way of shoe size, impossibility of shoe size. I don't think people challenge it. It's just a question literally of suspending disbelief. But the latest revelation, or the most amazing detail found by Armitage, is that it looks like the J6 pipe bomber, the one walking the itinerary, had a smartwatch with which he or she was engaging, which would effectively preclude Brian Cole Jr., who's a high-functioning autist, but never had one, allegedly, wouldn't know how to use one, wouldn't have engaged with one. And the point or the problem at this point in time is the administration tied to this, or the administration, are certain remaining elements in this administration so thoroughly tied to this on a reputational basis, on a status basis, that they'll never even potentially admit any mistake in this.
It sure looks like it. I mean, it was a setup from day one. There was so much reason to disbelieve it. The timing of it was after Steve Baker was about to report it, that it appeared that the person involved had a gait match, height match, it now realizes a watch match, the certain injuries that individual had match. And then of course it was someone who was on the Capitol Police, who had been a critical witness against the various individuals charged with January 6 crimes, and then magically ends up at the CIA. My own view is that she was likely always on the CIA staff, and was undercover with with the Capitol Police, which the CIA has been known for doing in the past. As soon as that report was incipient to be published and broadcast, they suddenly rush this indictment of what screams Patsy from 10 miles away, a black autistic apolitical kid from the D.C. area who didn't match the gait, didn't match the height, didn't match the manner and method of walk in general, didn't have the kind of limp that these other individuals had. Now he can, they induced a false confession under coerced testimony in an isolation. The car didn't seem to match up with the location. The phone didn't seem to match up with the location. And now we know the guy, he never wears a watch, least of all an Apple smartwatch. And she does. It just keeps pointing in her direction and away from the obvious to me Patsy direction. And so the question is, how long are they going to drag this out of covering up for these people? It tells you a lot that when people are trying to decipher Trump's betrayal, as a good number of his voters perceive it. Tucker Carlson's talking about third parties. Marjorie Taylor Greene's talking about third parties. Thomas Massey is contemplating new third parties. And a good share of his voter base, particularly the independent share of his voter base, very skeptical of what he's done, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's not closing down that war, whether it's the Iran war, whether it's these corruption scandals that keep burgeoning and building. Whichever it is, the thing that they want to suggest, maybe it's fear and intimidation of being assassinated. Well, that doesn't explain the corruption. That doesn't explain a range of other things. Say, well, it's the Israel lobby. Israel lobby clearly has influence, but how does that explain this? Everything about this screams that for whatever reason, Trump is afraid of, intimidated by, or in bed with the deep state. He's not deep sixing the deep state. He's empowering the deep state. And so no better example than covering up for a CIA spook who planted the pipe bombs on January 6th. And once they knew that was about to be outed, they rushed in and raced in to set up and frame a patsy. And the fact they picked a black kid on the spectrum just makes it twice as bad politically. But I don't think Judge Janine and all that garbage. She's a prosecutor with a long-standing reputation back when she was a state prosecutor of framing innocent people and sticking. But Barnes, she was on Fox News. She must be credible and reliable. The fact that she was regularly on Fox News is a reason to be skeptical, not embracing. And it is embarrassing how bad this setup and frame up is.
I didn't mention it yesterday, but Baker talked about, I'm going to get into it again tomorrow, how he discovered, he didn't go looking for any individual. He had been studying the pipe bomber for years. And then he was also looking at Capitol Police, who were engaged in his view, abusive, unlawful, lethal, but what was supposed to be non-lethal use of munitions. And he was studying the pipe bomber, the person in the video walking around, so much that as he was looking to see whether or not any of the Capitol Police in their backpacks were using, certain types of directed energy weapons, he's like, I know the way that person walked, and that's how he made the connection in his own opinion. When they came out 5 days after what was supposed to be, it was 5 days after his report was released, and then say, well, now, and then investigated Brian Cole Jr., who had evaded police for 5 years. That's a coincidence that's unbelievable in the literal sense. And Baker also said, interesting thing, that Trump has never once thanked or complimented the team on their successes. And for those who don't remember, I know that everybody watching probably does, Judge Janine Pirro, for those who need refreshing their memories, there was a guy desk convicted for a murder and rape he did not commit during Pirro's time as district attorney. Deskvic's appeals and requests for DNA testing were fought or stalled by her office. Deskvic was ultimately exonerated and freed in 2006 after a subsequent DA reviewed the DNA evidence that linked him to the actual kill. I mean, it's crazy. She's literally done something like this before, but people don't want to complain or criticize anybody who's in the administration for fear of being labeled whatever. But past his prologue, Robin, what's it going to take? What's it going to take for something to break this case wide open?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me that there's several things. The institutional conservative media is still not covering it, and a fair share of the independent podcasting space on the right is also not covering it. And I think as long as that stays the case, and no court exposes it itself in any of these proceedings, then you might have to wait for a jury verdict to get some attention to what appears to me a clear-cut setup and frame-up. I've been surprised that I was surprised they did this in the first place. I was surprised that they continue to double down on it. It will go down as one of the most, aside from the Epstein files and the assassination inquiries, this is really damning on Dan Bongino. Bongino was this was a top topic with him, that the pipe bomber people need to be invested, that, the setup, it looked like a setup. And then he participates in the setup and then he takes big credit for it when he's exiting. This will be utterly humiliating to whatever's left of his reputational integrity. I would think he would be curious, but clearly he's not, and continues to go along with it. So as long as those people continue to sing to the script that the deep state apparatus has written for them, then I don't see them course correcting.
It is that, now that you mention it, like, Fox News not really covering it, and the bigger names, and bigger than bigger than us on the conservative side, there's a number who are they have not discussed the story ever. And even when when Tucker Carlson, when he did his interview, he really had to qualify the fact that I don't know anything about this. I'm just letting Steve talk. I'm not mentioning any names, and I don't, definitely covering his own ass. And then, you had also Megyn Kelly didn't ultimately publish her interview with Steve Baker. It is interesting that you mentioned that.
And I think that's a big part of it. Not terribly shocked. Like all of these people, for the most part, weren't willing to raise questions about January 6th at the beginning. We were one of the only channels out there at the very inception saying this doesn't add up. We were doing the first interview on this when I was in D.C. Days
I remember.
after.
I remember we were live the day of, and you're like, I couldn't get there, and Alex Jones was saying, "Stay away and avoid it. It's a trap." But I remember even the day of, like, this is not an insurrection. This is, okay, it's a violent protest in certain pockets, and then the news of 5 police officers killed, and then how it all gets disproven and debunked, but the initial memory is still fresh in the minds of many people.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened, the first ever hush hush at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, exploring alternative narratives, was the January 6th case. And it said, everything about this screams infiltrators, informants, instigators, that the unusual and unexpected and unexplained security lapses, that, the pipe bomb thing never made sense from the get-go. How does it get planted where it gets planted? How does it magically get discovered the way it gets discovered? How is it not even real pipe bombs that could actually go off? It's like none of this is adding up. And they couldn't find him somehow. It's like they're finding some little grandma that they thought trespassed, but they can't find the person who planted the pipe bombs they made a huge deal out of. None of this made any sense. But the gullibility of the institutional media was a factor. The fact that this is deep state aligned and allied was a factor. I suspect they finally pulled the trigger on suing because they didn't want anyone else to pick it up. They wanted to intimidate the Tucker Carlsons, the Megyn Kellys even, from covering this. And definitely everybody else in the conservative legal media space. But for like us and a few others. I think Robert Gouveia has voiced, has shared what Steve Baker's reported and other people, but I think that's about it. I don't think Good Logic has covered this. I don't think a bunch, and I may have missed it, but to my knowledge, and definitely not your Benny Johnsons and all that crowd, they run away from this. They hide from this. I don't even think Steve Bannon has done much on this. So it tells you where a lot of these people are, that they get so easily intimidated of just exposing institutional corruption. They have no problem going after a range of political dissidents and outsiders even within their own political tribe, you might say. But if it involves exposing deep state institutional corruption, they're usually quite hesitant. Now, credit to Tucker for putting Steve Baker on and for airing it in ways that I think Megyn Kelly might have been inclined to do so. But honestly, it was well, you'll be on with her tomorrow. I'm not, because I'll say things like, it's pretty pitiful, Megyn, to interview him and be so easily intimidated that it sounds like corporate Megyn rather than independent Megyn.
Well, no, and this, or I can be more empathetic in that when you're at a certain level, also you don't necessarily get to make all the decisions. And there might be, when Tim Pool decided not to have on Turtle Boy, the guy who was covering the Karen Reed case, like, if your lawyers tell you not to do it and then you do it anyhow, I mean, I appreciate some people are not comfortable doing that. So I can understand it, especially knowing that she knew by not airing the interview, because Baker had publicized it, that she would take something of, there would be something of a minor reputational hit. Like, people are going to come to conclusions and you can't blame them for doing it. That being said, you don't know what level of the chain said you're not airing this and or why. But
I think anyways, she has well, it's problem. I suspect this is true of Tucker. I suspect that it's true of Megyn, that they have conventional corporate legal advisors. I always find it fascinating that people that are independent, dissident thinkers rely on institutional advisors and advocates on decisions about things like publication and broadcast. There were some people that were trying to. No, I think some might have been sincerely misunderstanding things, but some others were trying to intimidate in communicating to us things that were lies and libels about Chase Hughes. I just have this natural rage now these days. And so I responded in kind, and got some. One person that's connected to that's going to get sued because the guy's just an idiot trying to. But you can't be an independent dissident and have corporate insider advisors because you'll get bad advice. Because they live in a very different world, in a very different place, a very different space. Trump should have learned this lesson over the years, but Steve Bannon should have learned this lesson over the years, but neither one of them has. Bannon is sitting there and he has on, to transition into the SCOTUS this past week, the number one advocate for Amy Coney Barrett to be on the Supreme Court as a fake critic. Steve. It's bad enough that you have the worst taste in recommending people on the planet, but it's embarrassing because Bannon knows that Mike Davis is a corrupt criminal fraud who's refusing to register as a lobbyist to help insiders sabotage the entire Trump agenda inside the administration, particularly in antitrust. Steve Bannon knows this personally. And who does he put on Bannon? Mike Davis. And worse yet, he removes the reality. He's like, Steve Bannon's like, why wasn't there better due diligence done? Because Mike Davis was in on it. We did do our due diligence. We had show after show after show, even before she was nominated, saying whatever you do, don't nominate Amy Coney Barrett. She won't be the female Scalia. She will be the female Roberts. She will betray Trump on the election. She will betray the American people on core issues of civil rights and civil liberties in the COVID and comparable context. That you'll get conventional Bushite opinions on cultural issues. Congratulations. That's about it. I was screaming this from the top of my lungs. And people Mike Davis was just the opposite, publishing articles and having pals publish articles in Fox News, lobbying everybody in her favor, lying about her all the way through. People allied, like that shipwreck crew loser, attacking me as a traitor, as a whatever other nonsense, born as a libtard, all that garbage. And yet here's Bannon promoting Mike Davis as some sort of independent voice when he was the leading advocate in conservative legal space for Amy Coney Barrett and libeling people like me in defense of Barrett. And then Bannon has him on as some sort of expert who is and being real critical too.
Robert, I'm going to see if I can find my post on that. I'll just read one that I put out because everybody knew I was going to do it. Where if I said, if only someone had warned us, if only someone had sounded the alarm on how bad a judicial appointment Amy Coney Barrett was. If only, and here's when I picked them from various years. This was 2021. Almost the entire conservative media infrastructure, especially in the legal world, sang from the same lyrics on how smart and Scalia-like ACB would be. The few of us who dissented were routinely shouted down and attacked. Maybe time for fewer Federalist Society members. This one was earlier, 2020. Barrett's apparent willingness to separate her faith from her legal judgment should worry conservatives. This is quoting from an article, Human Events. Jurists' first allegiance should be to the Constitution, not the shifting political and doctrinal line of Pope Francis's Vatican. And then, it goes on. But Also, just when it came to Mike Davis, I was like, I remember the things he said, and I remember the things. Why'd you get so small there? And I remember the things we said. Let me just bring it up here, Mr. MDMA. Is this it?
Yeah, people can look up the podcast from before her nomination and at her nomination that we did, that the Richard Barris and I did. I went on Alex Jones about this, that did a range of conservative interviews. Robert Gouvet covered it. My criticism, the commentary, you can go find the X feed where I have extensive criticisms. I go through all her entire biographical history, her entire academic history, her entire private practice history, her entire judicial history. All of it screamed risk, 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 risk. She's the next Roberts. She's the next Roberts. She's the next Roberts. And the shipwreck crew was still lying about it. You said, "Oh, Barnes was only critical on one COVID case." Dude, I got long reply threads that were saying this case, this case, this case, this case, this case.
Let me bring this up because I want to also just make people understand how people frame things to absolve themselves of responsibility. Amy Coney Barrett sold herself as the next Scalia. Just you sold yourself as a conservative whistleblower. You're both frauds. I write, you were wrong on Amy Coney at the time. You're wrong on Kyle now. Here's what he said about her at the time. Amy Coney Barrett will make an excellent Supreme Court justice, but the Me Too mob would have accused her of torturing puppies, abusing children, some other garbage. The left is particularly vicious to conservative women. That's Mike Davis. Mike Davis says, left-wing groups are peddling radical schemes to pack the court. Let's add 3 right now. Amy Coney, Amul Tapar, I don't know who those are. But then just one thing here. He did the same thing.
Notice he put Barrett number 1. He was her leading advocate in D.C. He was the one promoting Fox News pieces, his commentary. He was the one who said she's the next Scalia. That's confession through projection. When he accuses us of being frauds, it's because Mike Davis is a fraud and a criminal who belongs in a federal prison. That's the reality of who Mike Davis is.
I want to also just highlight it. When someone says Amy Coney Barrett sold herself as the next Scalia, what they're saying is, I bought the fraud. They're not saying she sold. Dude, someone can sell me a piece of pyrite and say it's gold. If I buy it thinking it's gold, it's because I'm an idiot. So they sold it. I bought it. Mike Davis bought it because he didn't do any due diligence and he didn't listen to you.
He knew it. For people that don't know it, he was on the committee, on the Judiciary Committee. One of the giveaways when we first interviewed him, when he was pretending to be a faux populist lawyer, advocate, reformer, was, remember he said how great Mitch McConnell was? And it was thanks to Mitch McConnell. He was the lead person connected to Mitch McConnell to push Amy Coney Barrett through. So he knew about all this stuff because he'd followed me for a long time. So he knew what the criticisms were. He knew that she was not who he was pretending she was, but it was part of him developing political capital in D.C. Was pushing her through because he was tied at the hip to Mitch McConnell, who for all we know might be dead, and they may be trying to hide it. Nobody's seen him for 3 weeks. Apparently had a heart attack, been in the hospital. But Kentucky's legal rules are if they get through August, they don't have to have a special election for him. Whereas otherwise, they do have to have a special election. You might imagine what Kentuckian might run in that special election, for example. Really would not like to see in the United States Senate. So that's why they're probably going to cover it up, even if he is dead. Brain dead, functionally dead. That's who Mike Davis is. He is part of sort of rhino class traders, always borrowing from the rhetoric language of other people to try to pretend he's something he's not, like he pretended Amy Coney Barrett was something she's not. But you can, particularly on elections and civil liberties issues connected to COVID, but on issues, she is, like in this past session, on the big votes last week, on issues like elections, on issues like birthright citizenship, the most consequential votes for the political right in the country, she and Roberts were the 2 justices leading, with the 3 Democrats, the effort against the conservative cause. And we'll get into the substance of those cases in a little bit. But that's exactly what I said she would be. And that's precisely what she's become. And even worse, because of how young she is, she may be on the bench 30, 40 years. So it was one of Trump's.
No, your audio was glitching out for a bit, but I think it's back now. I think I asked our locals and they said, yeah, it was chopping up. But before we get into that, let me just do one thing so I don't lose the CommieTube chat rant, whatever we call it here. From Dark World XI, it says the Stitch And Adam Podcast is having the Birthright Citizen debate based on the Supreme Court rulings. Thought it'd be interesting. Also, happy birthday to me. Happy birthday. We had on John Eastman, who put together the most compelling argument, and it didn't get retained by the court. But before we get there, let me just do a number of the Rumble rants over on Rumble. So I don't fall too far behind. Gorgeous Mayhem 1 says, "Hey Barnes, I live in Texas. Please tell me Paxton is going to beat that can't be his name. AIDS Faragiko? What are the odds? Is his?
Yeah,
is that his?
name is Tyler,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tyler
I tell you, I can't read jokes. What? That's terrible. Okay. Now I feel bad. Today is July 5th, and the press secretary still hasn't been fired. That's KCAP1234. And okay, that's like a geez Louise. Now I understand what that post said. I gotta digest faster when I read in real time. Robert, let's start on the birthright citizenship case. I guess we'll get to everything, and you'll field some of the ones that I'm more or less familiar with. We had on John Eastman a while back. He put together the most compelling argument for what it means to be, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning that, people who are invading forces, people who are diplomats, who are not in the country with the intention of being subject to the jurisdiction of the country, do not get to have babies in the country and have the invading force become citizens. And there's a historical understanding of what subject to the jurisdiction thereof meant, specifically with respect to newly freed slaves. And the court basically just went with the very simplistic understanding that being subject to the jurisdiction thereof just means being on the soil, and that save and except for few exceptional limited circumstances, such as diplomats and invading forces, I guess, they don't yet equate birth tourism to an invading force, that they are born on the soil, they are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, even if the parents were here illegally with the intention of remaining illegal. I forget who put forward this hypothetical, but from an existential perspective, it is very concerning that basically now you can have adversarial illegal aliens who are specifically in the country to do harm, have a baby in the country, the baby's going to be a citizen, can abscond or go elsewhere afterwards, but that child can grow up and literally become president of these United States of America. And that's a first generation child of people who were born with adversarial interests or illegally with the intent of being illegal. And they are now citizens under this ruling from the birthright, understanding of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I say the only saving grace is that Congress can enact something to remedy this failure by the Supreme Court. But they literally went with, they went with the most superficial, childish understanding of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I know you predicted this would happen. You sort of argued the opposite, that subject to the jurisdiction thereof has a broader interpretation that might include even those who come from birthright tourism. You predicted this would happen. I know that you're disappointed. I know that Eastman put forward a very compelling argument, but they said no mas, executive order is unconstitutional, and just being born here makes you American, even if your parents were illegal and even if it's birth tourism. So what do you make of it, and where does it go from here?
So the conventional construction that you're taught in law school is the sort of jus soli, the territorial jurisdictional claims for citizenship and construing and interpreting and applying the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. There was noted, but when you review Professor Eastman's arguments and some additional arguments related to it, I found Professor Eastman's arguments ultimately persuasive to change my opinion, at least in part, and at least against the principle that just soli applies. The second aspect of this that is really problematic, from especially to do this on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, really something, because it was becoming clear from the arguments being made by those on the side of citizenship rights by birth that they really were using the subject interpretation. And for those that don't know, one of the founding principles of the American Revolution was that we rejected the idea of divine right of kings. We rejected the idea of monarchy in its entirety. We rejected the idea of subjects, period. and instead subject to the jurisdiction thereof just was the formulation for citizenship. And one of the things you can see when they've looked underneath the what was changed in the Declaration of Independence is that it started out referencing us as subjects and changed that to citizenship. An idea originated in its contemporary philosophical form by the Athens of Greece. Their idea was that we are a community of people who have joined together for the mutual and reciprocal protection of our liberties and our security in general. And that as such, and that the legitimacy of government did not originate from some divine or heretical hereditary rather rule, is that hereditary rule and divine basis and foundation and the idea that your privileges and rights come from and derive from what the government affords you is antithetical to the very foundation of the United States of America. But you could get a sense where the case was going when Roberts is citing a nation of immigrants and using that kind of language. Then you knew, and the analysis was like, even if you agree with the idea of jus soli, this is a very undeveloped and weakly explained argument by Roberts, who wrote it, and Barrett, who co-authored it. Barrett was the decisive vote because Kavanaugh only concurred that Congress had not allowed this interpretation yet, but he said there was no constitutional basis to do so. And then, of course, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch all dissented. The Thomas pointed out the history belied. They did this a couple of times this past week, where they just made up histories, where they contradict themselves from one case to the next as to the principles that predicate it. And that tells you that this was not a intellectually honest decision by Barrett and Roberts. It was an institutionalist decision that favored the elites. That's who they were really deferential to and polemical in support of, because their arguments were usually ahistorical or historically refutable, as well as unprincipled and untethered to a consistent ideological explanation, especially the way they loved the English common law as the basis for all this. And the idea of being subject, it's all about allegiance to the king. It's like, whoa. We don't have allegiance to the government. The government has an allegiance to us. We have an allegiance to one another as citizens. That's what the whole concept of a community of citizenship entails, but not like anything like this. So I found their arguments weak, especially if you read them in broader context, that if you don't recognize the context or you don't read the dissents, then you don't fully appreciate how the AWOL their decision really was. And it was more a version of the legal academy's instructions on this for the last century. But but it's not a broad consensus, or not entire consensus in the legal academy. And at the same time, a deeper, broader view, which is what Eastman brought to it, and the broader philosophical context was brought in. Now, what's interesting is, part of this was the Trump administration could have made, I thought, better arguments on they made some, but they didn't fully develop the subject-citizen gap, disparity. The other is because the other thing that the majority opinion completely ignores, for the most part, is all of these cases and legal scholars that they're interpreting are not referencing trespassers. In fact, the word trespass does not exist in the whole opinion. It's one weakness, I think, of the dissent. Is that these are not just temporary aliens and sojourners. These are trespassers. And you take the same construct, people that are illegally and unlawfully present here. The other thing, like the majority opinion says, oh, we're not like they even have this whole thing about the idea of limiting citizenship by birth is somehow racist. But that's what the Dred Scott decision was. Technically, it wasn't race-based. It was slave-based. Now, slavery had a racial hue in the United States after the indentured servants were dying off at a high level. So, the racism was a post hoc rationalization for slavery, not the other way around. But it was like, those weren't really race decisions. Because there were.
Bless me.
Yeah, bless me. So there were black citizens. It was a slave-based, caste-based system. But the idea of aristocratic rule is more offensive to constitutional democracy and individual liberty than the fact that we previously had slaves, and they were trying to pretend that that was by blood, and that was never supposed to be the case, supposed to be by land. Well, then how do you explain the foreign diplomat provision? Isn't that by blood? Because the baby is born here, right? So the baby is, there's really no logical decision. They're like, well, they say the parents might not be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But you just told me that didn't matter. You told me that what their parents were was irrelevant. The legal status of the parents was irrelevant to the question. And it's like, okay, well, then there's no distinction present. And then they have inconsistency there. They're like, well, in those cases, it would be intruding on a foreign sovereign. Wasn't it intruding on a foreign sovereign to declare the child of citizens that are part of that foreign community to be citizens here? Isn't that a problem? Wouldn't it have the same problem? They don't make any intellectual. Go ahead.
Oh no, I appreciate what you're saying, because they had asked the question of whether or not birthright birth tourism could be qualified as an invasion. They said obviously an invading force, no. And then is it a stretch to say people who are here illegally are invaders? It is interesting that if you qualify them as trespassers, and I didn't put this together, that the word trespass is nowhere in the decision. It's like saying a squatter somehow has rights after having squatted in a place illegally. If they're trespassing for the purposes of giving birth on that soil, you are ratifying illegal conduct and rewarding illegal conduct to your own detriment and to your own invading threats.
They're also the other thing they ignore is they recognize that there are a range of commentary at the time the House and the Senate passed it that suggests this was not meant to apply to that precise group of people. And in there, they weren't even referring to people unlawfully present. They were just referencing people who are transients, who are temporarily present, who are not. Because again, if you go back to the broader concept, we're now a community of citizens that have reciprocal obligations to one another. In for example, for the very beginning of the Republic, it was established that most scholars agreed, most ordinary people agreed, that to the degree we have historical sources that are trustworthy on the subject, that unlike citizenship in the UK, which was really more being subjects rather than citizens, that you could divorce your country because the legitimacy and authority for that derive from you, and so you could withdraw. They seem to implicitly suggest you as an individual cannot expatriate. They leave that open, as if expatriation, which already occurs legislatively, maybe you can't. They could just, and then it's like, hold on a second. That means a country could unilaterally declare me a citizen based on whatever they come up with. And I'm subject to their taxation. I'm subject to their criminal authority. I'm subject to their civil regulatory power. That makes no sense when you understand the American constitutional republic is rooted in the precepts and principles of you are a part of a community as a citizen equal to it, and that the only legitimacy of the government derives from your consent to it. And that if you do not, that the social contract conceptualization of legitimate governance that was a key intellectual influence on the founding generation. So when you analyze it in that context, the entire majority opinion appears to be both philosophically and historically detached from who and what the American Constitution. I mean, he kind of misquotes Thomas Paine, Justice Roberts, talking about how we're an asylum for mankind. It's like, what? I mean, not asylum. What do you call it? What's the word? When you want protection of a government because you're coming in, a word, not asylum, but maybe it is asylum. Never mind.
No,
it is because it has two meanings of the term. So, but that's not what like take that. Go to the Declaration of Independence, which we just celebrated the quarter millennial anniversary of. It talks about two different groups on the borders. It talks about objects to the king excluding people that are wanting to join the community, that the community wants to join, have joined with them, and saying the king is illicitly excluding this group. It also complains that the king is illicitly including a group, namely various tribes and other foreign powers who are allowed into the country. So it parallels that because this is a community. And a community, like any kind of like family or local community, think of any of those terms, kindred, you name it, that's by consent. That's what legitimates it. That allows you to join. That allows you to leave. and that has no connection to trespassing transients who we called aliens. And when they talk about the historical debate, they ignore that nobody said that the sons and daughters of illegals would be people unlawfully present in the country would be U.S. citizens. Nobody says that. They just point out that not a majority commented on it because nobody thought it would apply that way. Mm-hmm. No, it was kind of so alien to what they were debating and discussing that there wasn't need for such commentary, but it rebuts and refutes their own claims. And so the extraordinary deviating nature of the opinion, the fake nature of its history. I mean, they said this also in the Federal Reserve case. They make up history that doesn't exist. They're like, okay, so tell me, so it's all built into English common law, except English common law as applied today excludes for illegal trespassing sojourners from its definition of citizenship. It never even mentions that. The same justices are eager to cite international legal standards and norms who say this is all about following and tracking English common law, when the American Revolution was an implicit rejection of large parts of the English common law, particularly those parts that treated people as subject to the sovereign, as privileged to be under the protection of the sovereign, but instead saw the American people as individuals being the sovereign. And consequently, it was their mutual and reciprocal commitment to one another that legitimated government and that formed government, and was the necessity. And this came very heavily from Thomas Paine. And they just ignore they want to cite Thomas Paine when they say America is an asylum for mankind. And then they discard and disregard Thomas Paine when he has all these philosophical ideas of what legitimates government, because that would rebut and refute their claims. So it's one after another. Now, very good dissent by Thomas and Alito and Gorsuch. The only thing I would say about that is I would have liked it if they were trying to pin, we talked about it after the oral arguments. I thought that the argument from domicile had a practical implication problem, and that Barrett had asked questions that were ominous for that line of argument, which what they wanted to say is if you called yourself home, and we have doctrines of domicile that have long shaped large aspects of this, and Thomas roots it in that principle, but it could have been more extensive and expanded, is the practicality issue. And so are you going to have constant debates about whether someone is subject to the jurisdiction because was their domicile in the U.S. or not? And they didn't want to go down that treacherous path as they perceived it in implementation. Now, here's another factor they mostly ignore. There was no construct of U.S. citizenship like we think of it today, really before the Civil War. It's why Dred Scott goes the way it does. The key is you are a citizen of the United States based on your state citizenship. And for that, nobody disputes that always had a domicile construct. You didn't even have to be physically located. It just had to be the place you consider and intend to be your permanent home. And the idea that we can't figure that out doesn't make sense when it's been adjudicated tens of thousands of times over American legal history. Because whether or not you're subject to that jurisdiction means, can you take advantage of that court system? And that often depends on who you're a domiciliary of. This became part of the Robert Kennedy debate when they wanted to exclude him from the ballot in New York by saying he was really a citizen of California rather than New York. And it has a long extended legal standard for it. But there wasn't, the 1 weak link was using that argument to conceptualize this issue, created a practicality problem. I always tell young lawyers, try to give a solution to the judge that's not only well-rooted in the law, backed up by the broader policy and philosophical implications of it, but that are practical to implement and administer. When they don't have all of that combined, you'll find judges will find any excuse to avoid it. And I think that's one issue that was persuasive with Roberts and Barrett, though I think their main inclination was just elite-level ideological inclination towards support. And if there was anything that was consistent over the last several weeks, it is that this was a corporate court of the caste class. And that's where the number one consistency was, would this favor corporations or not? Would this favor institutional government or not? And if it favored institutional government and it favored, now sometimes when they were choosing between government branches, the legislative branch versus the judicial branch, or the legislative branch or the executive branch versus the judicial branch, or the bureaucratic branch versus the executive branch, even within a branch, then you got some consistent and quality decisions. But if it involved going for an individual and against a corporation, and immigration was one of those issues where corporations heavily profit from it, then you almost invariably the court aligned with the institutional interest and the corporate interest. And I think that was the main real motivating factor here.
And the bottom line, this is going to be good case law. It's going to be up to Congress to pass legislation which either bans birth tourism outright, which is an easily sort of governable issue, or goes and legislates that you would have to be here legally domiciled, legal resident, or whatever for your children to become American. And you could just have a legislative solution passed by Congress that children born to illegal aliens who are trespassing on the land do not become American citizens under the now defined birthright citizenship.
I mean, why do we call them aliens? Right? How can an alien be a citizen? It's like the language of it itself is contradictory. And yet they just ruled that transitory, temporary sojourners who are trespassing, present here illegally, that are alien to the nation, their children are American citizens, U.S. citizens. I'll give you one of the quotes from the prominent historical analysis. The transition from subject to citizen was the defining philosophical shift of the American Revolution. A subject was inherently bound to a monarch by perpetual allegiance and obedience to that monarch, owed into perpetuity. A citizen, by contrast, was a free and equal participant in a self-governing society whose political power derived from the people. Hence, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people by Abraham Lincoln, which, by the way, was a famous speech right before this 14th Amendment was passed. The restoring it to the more of the Greek democratic vision than the Roman Republic vision, which was kind of a hybrid influence at the time of our founders. Americans became citizens, meaning they were equal members of a community and collectively possessed political sovereignty. Athens, Greece, was the foundation of this principle, and you can see its application. Guess what in Athens, Greece? Guess who was not a citizen? Foreigners, foreign-born people, not citizens. Now, I would have proposed some sort of naturalization interpretation of the process. So if you're born in the United States, you could become a citizen if you go through and get legally naturalized. But that would be subject to congressional control and executive enforcement. But think about it like a family. What the Supreme Court said is on the most important matters of your life that a foreigner can become your family member, a forced, coerced by theft and deception family member. That if they trespass on your property, they get to own your property. They get to enjoy the benefits and produce of their property. It is, as you point, like a squatter's. And that is so foreign to the philosophical foundation of the constitutional republic, especially at the time, if you're doing an originalist analysis, in 1868. Their whole point was, and this is Thomas absolutely right about this, their whole priority of this was to make sure slaves and the sons and daughters and ex-slaves and sons and daughters of ex-slaves could be recognized and would be recognized as citizens. That was the whole historical impetus. It was not to deal with they didn't have an immigration crisis. They didn't have a bunch of people invading the country and retaking over its political sovereignty. I mean, it's literally like somebody invaded your family and gets to run your family now. And and I think that there was a missed opportunity in not using the trespass imagery, and allegory. But it fits when you understand the broader philosophical principles at issue here. I was shocked to see how efforts they were really interpreting subject to jurisdiction as if you're the subject of the government, when that's not you're only subject to yourself in America, because we are the government. The people are sovereign. And they completely blew it on that side of the aisle as well. And I think, and all those people that defended, I want to see lots of apologies. That's what Mike Davis should have been going around. He should have been making apology after apology after apology. But when you're a criminal fraud, that's very hard to do. But some of these other more normie conservatives, and so many of them are acting like, where did this come out? How could this possibly happen? Maybe Roberts and Barrett are just getting blackmailed somehow. I mean, it was somebody even criticized me. I don't think Barnes would have been this critical of Roberts. I was always this critical of Roberts. Said he was a corporate whore from the day before he was on the court. But it was clear that's who Barrett and Roberts come from. They come from the corporate aristocracy, the institutional elites. Now, it was good to see Kavanaugh breaking away from them. So that really means it's just two of them there, not really three. Kavanaugh will lean institutionalist, but is not in the pocket of the institutionalists. He just said Congress needs to change the law on this, but it doesn't require a constitutional amendment. But the nature of the decision requires a constitutional amendment, and good luck getting enough Democratic states to sign on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Senator Paul's had already proposed this even before it went to the Supreme Court. And I think it's very popular in the country. Americans as a whole do not like the idea of people invading their property, invading their family, and taking it over, especially as something as significant and consequential as the control of the government. And the historical illiteracy, the philosophical inconsistency, the legal principles being misapplied and contradicting themselves recently are all evidence that this decision is an AWOL decision.
We'll get into the hypocrisy in a second. I just want to highlight a comment over on CommieTube, which is, Viva, go fuck yourself for ignoring the YouTube audience. Hashtag irony. I replied to this individual. I don't know if he meant to be, if this was supposed to be a joke. It seems like he's got a channel with that looks quasi-legitimate. He doesn't seem to be a raging asshole in his channel. So maybe this is just a joke that didn't translate properly, especially since I'm reading the comments on YouTube. I just said if I miss, there was another one, hold up, that I wanted to get to because it was here. Viva and Randy are the best. Barnes, are you Randy? Okay. And then I think there was another one right here. Sanctuary, Robert, not asylum. Sanctuary is maybe you meant sanctuary. We're going to get to the Rumble
well,
chat
it's like
in a second.
Requesting asylum. And I think Payne said asylum, at least Roberts quoted him as saying asylum for all mankind, but he meant the principles, by the way, that would rebut and refute that this is the way you get citizenship. And two, I mean, Justice Thomas made a very good argument on the historical points. Not only did the sponsor of the amendment say it would never apply to sons and daughters of aliens, least of all, no one thought of trespassers. The idea that someone would trespass into the country to have kids,
But what's amazing, not to belabor the point, but some idiots out there saying it's about the baby, not about the parents. And then you would get into the realm of the universe where, all right, a baby has just been born on American soil and is now American, despite the fact that the parents were illegal trespassers. They now get deported, and then it's going to become a whole humanitarian crisis that you can't deport the illegal alien trespassing parents because the kid has a right to be here now, and you're not going to separate a 1-month-old baby from its parents, his or her parents. And so it basically grants rights and privileges to people who broke the law in order to steal them. And when it came to recognizing rights for the child, it's not about the right to have rights. It's about the rights that flow from abiding by the law.
And I'll flip you another side of that. There are some who don't intend to do it. Like, literally like they're on vacation, it happened. And they wake up and suddenly the government claims they owe a bunch of taxes to them. Or they are subject to criminal prosecution for not registering their foreign account. And they literally just happened to be born in the U.S. That was it. Their parents didn't think of them as citizens of the U.S. because almost no country in the world has this birthright citizenship in application in the modern world. And so what they're really saying, and especially when they suggest you can't divorce, that you're stuck in this forced marriage, they are really trying to restore the subject, like aside from the illegal immigration debate, I found more philosophically dangerous and perilous was the idea that we are the permanent subjects of the government and that we're privileged just to be under their protection, which really means we're subject to the old monarchical rule, old elite governance. And it's almost like they're trying to restore the aristocratic version of governance before America existed and undermine it and sabotage it into perpetuity. And one of so that's that problem. Second, for all people like, oh, it's just about where the baby was. Well, that's contradicted by the fact they use their parental status to deny them citizenship. Because if their parents are foreign diplomats, you say, no, they're not citizens. Mm-hmm. If their foreigners are native-born Americans, you say they're not citizens. So even though they're still subject to the jurisdiction of the United States under the traditional application that was just applied to the majority decision, that you're subject to the power of the U.S. sovereign when you're under this logic of jus soli being applied in the contemporary context. Their own argument contradicts itself. So they selectively include blood and familial status as a basis of either granting or denying citizenship when it's convenient to them or when it's been universally recognized it's never been allowed, even under the broadest interpretation of jus soli. And then they flip and contradict themselves. So like that's where their arguments are and then the last part, historically, because again, we weren't considered citizens of the United States so much as citizens of the states who derived our U.S. citizenship through our citizenship, state citizenship. Well, guess what? If you weren't domiciled in that state, you were no longer considered a citizen of the state. So that's another question they refuse to answer in the majority opinion. That if I go from Tennessee to California and I decide to make California my permanent residency, I get to vote in California. I no longer get to vote in Tennessee. I have the political protection of the laws of California, but not the same scale. You have some, but not the same scale as the ones in Tennessee. I may not even have access to Tennessee state courts in certain circumstances. I may have or not have access to federal courts for diversity of citizenship purposes. So they don't address that. So all the very good arguments that led me to change my mind that were made by Professor Eastman, especially when I looked at the broader philosophical complex, were really reinforced by the disastrous debacle that was this decision.
Before we move on to the next one, let me just read a few of the Rumble rants over on Rumble. And I think we got confirmation from Build with Mooney that he was joking, or at least he was just trying to get me to read the comment. Create 16 justices, load the courts, then make it the last time you can increase the number of judges. Just saying, says Cultivated Mind. Well, they'll do the same thing in 4 years. So last time, promise. But thank you, Cultivated Mind. And King of Biltong up in the house says, turn up the flavor with Peri Peri Biltong. Mild heat, big flavor, over 50% protein to keep you going. Try the full Peri Peri range at BiltongUSA.com. Use code BARNES for 10% off. Go check them out. It's amazing. Cultivated Mind also has amazing stuff. Check them both out. And then we got Eric John Pizza, who's got an amazing channel where he makes pizza into looking like things and people, says Viva La Viva. Robert, when you talk, I know I made this comparison last week when I was analyzing some of these decisions, where they misconstrue or they invoke historical precedent when they want to, and then entirely disregard it when they want to. It was the when is voting day? Do you get to count ballots for 5 days after election day? What is election day? Is it counting the ballots the day of, or counting the ballots that were received as of the day of, or do you get to arbitrarily, depending on state, fix a certain random number of days afterwards when you can receive ballots if they are allegedly post-dated prior to election day or on election day? And do you count those votes, or do you just say no, received by election day, or it doesn't count? And the Supreme Court came out, and I don't know who the majority was on this one. They came out and say, the fact that, they did this during the Civil War, well, that was different, and we're not bound by 200 years of historical precedent, and so we'll deviate from it. Whereas in the Birthright Citizenship, they say, well, the historical precedent was X, and we're going to stick with that, even though it's a bastardized interpretation of history. They basically now opened the door for an indefinite number of days after the election day to receive ballots that should then be counted, and we're going to see potentially what happened in California for the LA mayoral race happen at the federal level. Have they opened a Pandora's box of ballot harvesting, fraud from a politicized United States Postal Service? I mean, I'm not trying to be mean to people. They took political sides, and these are the people going to be determining which, ballots get post stamped or whatever. Have they opened up Pandora's box to undermine all future elections? And if they have, what's the solution to it?
And who was the key fifth vote on this case?
I think it was Barrett as well. I just didn't want to.
Yes, indeed. I
didn't want to.
If you're looking for a traitor, the quick one up is Amy Coney Barrett. This is one of the key areas I hammered on her nomination. I said she will be a disaster on the election issues that were forthcoming in 2020. Be like, no, she's the perfect savior. Da, da, da. One of Mike Davis's pitches and other people's pitches was she worked on the Bush 2020 challenge and so forth. It's like, yeah, that's because Bush was on the establishment elite side of the equation. She has shown the capacity to completely inverse or reverse any premise she has for a decision if she wants a different outcome. That's why I always tell people, if you want to improve your reasoning, recognize that motivation has a monopoly on your reasoning. But that doesn't mean a bad motivation or a unrecognized motivation has to dictate and determine your decision. Instead, shift your motivation and you can improve your reasoning. But these decisions were so riddled with motivated reasoning that was often contradicted by the facts, contradicted by history, contradicted by their own philosophical arguments within a day in some cases of these decisions. So you look at election day construction. This is Congress's mandate, so it's not a constitutional requirement. Congress can reform and remedy this. There should have been a more coherent election day set of election reforms they pushed through Congress. I mean, they had some of those in the SAVE Act, but then they kept putting stuff in that didn't need to be in, took stuff out that did need to be in, and Trump leveraged all of his political capital for, in my opinion, a stupid war rather than real institutional reform at the election level. But so the Congress has for 100 years said you got to vote because they were objected to different states voting on different days for federal elections. And they said no more of this. And what the Constitution provides is the states get the first chance to decide the time, place, and manner of elections, but Congress can override it at any time for federal elections. And that's what Congress did more than a century ago to prevent exactly this from happening. And for people that don't remember, at the beginning of our country, we didn't have, the secret ballot. We didn't have, it was public. Everybody got to see who is this person, what are they up to, are they really part of our community, is this legitimate? You could challenge or contest it at the scene. Election day was often like party day. You had picnics and like parties and other kinds around the election. So the idea of a secret ballot, of a state monopolized ballot, that the state, even then when we went to a secret ballot system, you could bring in your own ballot. But again, election day had to be the same day, which by the way meant no early voting either. That it was on the same day you came and you voted, and they could see you when you publicly showed up. Even when you had a ballot, the state didn't monopolize that ballot. It could be your own ballot. It could be printed out by political parties. This was particularly critical when you had different levels of literacy, when you had different levels of language skills throughout different parts of our country's history, and so that's why it was essential. An election day, not election days, not election weeks, not election months. And here, they acknowledge that all the original application and interpretation of this set of statutes said it was meant to be one day and one day only. And they're like, well, let's not be excessive. So here's these originalist justices, Roberts and Barrett, once again taking the lead to be the decisive votes and the decisive authors of a decision that utterly ignores originalism by their own admission and acknowledgement. So take that into consideration the next time they say we have to be originalist. Barrett is the ultimate Scalia substitute and so forth.
Let me ask you the Steelman argument, Robert. I want to refresh my memory. When it came to early voting, there's still overseas voting from military men. If they're received after election day, those always counted, right? It's not like
no. So absentee voting was considered was controversial at the time, but as usual, whenever you get war, you get undermining constitutional liberties. So the first time that we allowed absentee voting was because again, remember, it's important that the person could only vote in their community, that the local community could make sure they were legitimate and credible in their voting, that's really who they are, and so forth. Make sure there's nothing obviously illicit going on, like people giving them say, here's a bottle of whiskey, here's your ballot to fill out that I've already filled out for you. Make sure none of that was happening and going on. The Civil War happens, and they're worried about the incapacity of troops to get to base, because 1864 voted during the Civil War, and the concern was in the Union, the Union states, was that it would interfere and interrupt the military effort to have people come all the way back to their hometowns and vote, and then go back to the battlefield. But they still required that the vote be received by election day. So that you still had to make sure the vote was received by election day. And so theoretically, that might involve early voting and that you vote a day or two or three in terms of when you cast it. But it wasn't considered a vote until it was received. So that's the problem with early voting, is the vote is not just cast early, it's received early. Here, the mechanism was it wasn't until it was received for the purposes of counting. And they didn't consider it for those purposes. That's why there's an argument for early voting, but that there isn't for late voting. Then during World War I is when they decided they were worried they couldn't get the ballots back in time. So they said as long as you gave it to the military, to the government, for purposes of transporting it by election day to back to the local jurisdiction, then it was considered okay. But there was, and that they allowed some space, some time to be able to get that, so that if it showed up late at the state level, it was still considered cast on election day. But the key there is you're giving it to the government directly. There's no obligation to use the government. You can use the Postal Service, but you can also use any common carrier. And as long as the common carrier says you gave it to them by election day, and that's what opens the door to massive levels of fraud, then it's okay. Logically, that means a state could say, as long as you sign under oath that you filled out this ballot on election day, as long as you drop it off a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month after election day, we'll still count it as being cast on election day. They don't deal with these kind of disastrous policy ramifications and implications because they wanted to approve it. Because the key to mail-in voting, there's different levels of the fraud opportunity in mail-in voting. And to remind people out there, President Jimmy Carter and Secretary Baker both agreed in their Baker-Carter Commission report after the 2000 election that the greatest threat to accuracy and to honest elections, constitutionally honest elections, was mail-in voting. Here's one of the risk points. One, you don't know whether they actually cast the ballot because it's just the ballot shows up through maybe a common carrier delivering it. You don't know if the common carrier is being accurate about postmarking it correctly. The logic of this decision would open up that you just vouch for it being filled out on election day, or by election day, even when that's not at all what the congressional intent was. And they just basically completely abandoned an originalist interpretation of the intent of the statute within the broader context of our constitutional Republican integrity in elections. The reason why people push for same-day voting with in-person, with paper ballots, is because every other mechanism has a greater risk of fraud occurring. Doesn't guarantee that an election is fraudulent, but it increases the risk of it being fraudulent. And that's why people don't believe, Raton is acknowledging, people are increasingly skeptical of California's elections. He's like, doesn't matter whether, the point of this is to try to expand, to make sure people can get their ballots in and to make sure every person's vote counts. He goes, doesn't matter if that's the purpose. Increasingly, Americans believe they're fraudulent. And he goes, so we got to fix at least the appearance of that. And the only way to fix the appearance of that is to not have ballots be counted for days, weeks, and months after election day. I don't think the decision was consistent with congressional intent. The court implicitly acknowledges this by the originalist application of it. What's fascinating is the originalism says that you can look at how that particular principle was applied after the passage of the law to understand the meaning and intent of that law. Here they say just the opposite. Both Roberts and Barrett say, that's overrated. We only look at the text. It's like, no, you don't. You've almost never looked at just the text. It tells you that there are some of these aspects of these decisions that I could find a credible argument for. They don't make that credible argument. Instead, they make incredulous arguments that tell you that they were reverse engineering this from a motivation to allow mass mail-in voting because it favors institutional elites. They'll get their claps from the Hamptons crowd in Paris, where Justice Roberts likes to party. People can think there must be some secret conspiracy or blackmail effort. No, that's who these people are. They're institutionalist elitists. They do not care about constitutional consistency. They don't care about internal consistency. They care about serving and servicing the privileged and professional class they are a part of. So just because they may have a different opinion when there's a dispute between the governments, between the state and the feds on, say, something like an issue like abortion, because you look at abortion, the principal application would be that abortion is murder and as such could never be legal, period. They instead saw it as a state versus federal government issue. So between the branches of government, they may make good decisions. But if it involves hurting corporate or institutional interests or causing too many cackles at their parties in the Hamptons in Paris, they will not be on board because that's who they were before they got on the court. That you don't have to fantasize about some elite blackmail conspiracy when it's who these people have always been. They do not see us as one of us. They see us as above us. They're precisely the kind of aristocrats that were on the wrong side of the Revolutionary War. I have one ancestor that was a loyalist. I have disowned that ancestor. I'll have nothing to do with it, or any of their legacies. But that's who these people are. And that's why you got decisions like the birthright citizenship betrayal to the conservative cause and election day betrayal to the conservative cause. And it's not a surprise. The number one vote to screw any election remedy, any election reform, whether it's at the philosophical level or the practical application level, has been one person since 2020, and it's Amy Coney Barrett.
And people in the chat think it's an own to say, Barnes, where did your parents come from?
I'll tell you where my parents come from. They founded this country. We go all the way back to after Plymouth Rock. So there were Barneses at Valley Forge. There were family members like Colonel Prescott right at Bunker Hill. I got America in my veins. So that's where my family comes from.
Well, and I'll also highlight, even if Barnes's parents had been illegal or came over, on boats during World War II, this was only going to be prospective, not retroactive. And so it wasn't going to, okay, that's the way it was back then. And now the question is this sustainable? And the answer to it being sustainable is probably not. And so you couple allowing the children of illegals who are here trespassing illegally to now be automatic citizens, coupled with elections running, counting ballots for 5 days, if received for 5 days. And why only 5 days? Arbitrary. It was Mississippi law. Maybe another one's going to say 7 days. And then they're going to have to go back to SCOTUS and say, well, when is too many days too much? And then it's going to be arbitrary to say.
Oh, and not only that, when do you no longer even need a common carrier? When it can just be you swear under oath that you cast your ballot on election day and you drop it off 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. You can see how this opens the door to massive electoral fraud. And when people like Ro Khanna, a left-leaning with some good populist instincts, but very Democratic partisan who wants to stack the Supreme Court, even though I like a lot of other things he's done, he's still AWOL on a range of issues. When even he's saying in California, everybody, this looks bad. Everybody thinks these elections are stolen. Everybody thinks they're robbed. We got to fix this. We can't keep doing this. Then you get an understanding of the political ramifications of this and implications of it for public confidence in our elections. But it reveals when Barrett's only consistency on every single election-related case has been to rule in favor of the Democratic elites and against Trump. When the number one reason Mike Davis and his crowd sold Trump on Barrett was that she'll be a great vote on election issues. Gives you an idea what a fraud she is. And they are.
Let me bring this up here. I'll get to CommieTube chat. This was Build with Mooney says it worked. Someone says, what's on the shirt? It says best dad ever. It was a Father's Day gift, and I've been wearing it. I won't tell you. In the
form of the American flag.
In the American flag. They didn't design it. They found it online. It was great. It's beautiful. Going down slightly here because there was
one little tidbit to remind people. We were very pro people coming into the country as long as they were people we wanted in the country. We were the Declaration of Independence, 2 principles: keep unwanted foreigners out, allow wanted foreigners in through the naturalization process. And the election principles have been at our founding. It was the elections would be publicly held on the same day with accountability and transparency to reduce the risk of fraud. And what the Supreme Court just did is greenlight fraud at 2 levels of illegals becoming citizens and being able to cast ballots until eternity, and it still count as an election day vote.
Now, Walter Houghton 4586 says, if the Supreme Court determined that the 14th Amendment to be something that wouldn't have passed, nor would it have passed today, what they decide.
Precisely right. And they're very selective. We'll get to the Federal Reserve case and these other cases, but very selective at who was a founder. It was like they generally have interpreted the founders, and this is a bias that exists within the academy, that ordinary everyday people tend to adapt almost reflexively without thinking it through. What made the philosophical foundation of our government is consent of the governed, and what made something lawful is the consent of the people. So, for example, for a constitutional amendment, you would want to know, what did the people think that informed what their representatives at the state level and federal level thought, and getting to a majority of enough states to make it binding and of Congress to make it binding. The founders were everybody. The founders were the ordinary everyday people who volunteered to serve in the war, the Revolutionary War. The founders were the people that helped smuggle and supply goods at great risk to themselves, particularly if the war was unsuccessful, and to make the war economy and war machine and war munitions work and survive. That's where, as George Washington said, it was in the Barnes brief this week. I'm in this to the end. I'll go up to the Scotch Irish and the Blue Ridges of Appalachia, because I know my people there will be with us till the end, as long as there's a bullet left to fire, as long as there's a gun left to trigger, as long as there's someone to advocate and fight for the constitutional liberty and republic. And those are the people whose ancestors, whose posterity to us as its prodigy have now been betrayed by these repeated Supreme Court decisions. But you get another example of that in their fake made-up history about the Federal Reserve.
Hold up. Before we get there, let me read a few over on Rumble. Sean 487 says, Barnes, my family is as old as yours. 1612 in Plymouth Towers landed. Not sure if it was the Mayflower, but in that group we have fought in all wars, came to Canada to build Mount Allison University. Crazy Dude says, great show. Viva. Happy birthday, America. Sean 487 says, just my 2 cents. Viva Fry. Here is the nuts house of Canada and New Brunswick is fast-tracking immigrants from Morocco and Algeria so we can be just like Paris. The shit is across the Western world. And then King of Biltong says, check out our Rumble channel for all things do-it-yourself, Biltong, and cool American history, streaming live 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central.
What's the name of the channel? King of Biltong?
No, it's Rustic Ranch. It's cool. rumble.com/C for channel /Rustic Ranch. Did I get to the one underneath there? I got that. And then there was another thing that I was going to do, which I forgot what it was. Robert, there are two cases which involve firing employees. One gets the okay, the other one doesn't. I mean, the distinction is going to be the separation of powers, and that the Federal Reserve apparently is not part of the executive. I mean, I guess that's the underlying conclusion. And that although you can fire for cause, you have to give due process to the Federal Reserve, which apparently is neither federal nor a reserve. This was Lisa Cook, the woman. I don't play these games, but she was sold as being the first black, on the governor or the board of governors of the Federal Reserve. First black woman, who apparently, if you trust Pulte or not, I forget what his first. What's Pulte's first name?
Bill
Pulte. If you believe him or not, she allegedly engaged in some form of mortgage fraud where she apparently had, like a bunch of others, 2 primary residences so they could save on interest rates. The low-level criminals, allegedly. They say Pulte comes out with a criminal referral, says investigate her for mortgage fraud. DOJ under Bondi, another one of Mike Davis's great picks, or at least, he was one of her biggest supporters. They haven't done anything with it yet. She hasn't faced any criminal charges that I know of yet. She gets fired. Trump says, for cause, you're unfit to do the job. We fire you. She goes and gets emergency injunctions to, keep her job in the interim. I forget which way it went at the lower levels, but the bottom line, it gets to the Supreme Court, and they say, you can't fire for cause without giving due process. She wasn't given due process, a chance to challenge the allegations against her, have a hearing, an adversarial hearing, whatever it is. And she gets to keep her job and get paid in the interim. And she'll fight the due process or the for cause element of this, but you can't fire her because it violates the independence, even for cause, of the agents of the Federal Reserve who need to be able to act without fear of repercussion, reprisals from a government that wants to coerce or extort conduct from them. And that even if Trump alleges it's for cause, he'll go through that process. And if he's right at the end of the day, he'll be right at the end of the day. But in the interim, she gets to keep her job and get paid. Clarence Thomas of the dissent, which is the right decision in this case, says it's for cause. The bar was extremely low in terms of the commander-in-chief's ability to fire for cause. It's not up to us to second guess it. It was almost unreviewable, the decision, when he says for cause. He says for cause, it's for cause, whether you like it or not. And they would not have issued this injunction to allow her to stay in place and get paid and keep her job in the interim. It's idiotic when you compare it to the other woman there. Her name is Slaughter. She was fired from the FTC. They managed to say, well, that's part of the executive and she can be fired at will and no problem there. But when it comes to the Federal Reserve, it's independent. And at this point, independent, it's autonomous. It's an autonomous blob that is answers to nobody, even for cause. It's idiotic. Robert, tell me why it's not idiotic.
It's extraordinary. We predicted this combination would happen, that they would overrule Humphrey's executor and FTC, but find a special exception and exemption for the Federal Reserve, even though there was no philosophically sound or constitutionally consistent reason to do so, because of the institutionalist influence by the combination of Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Roberts on the court. Though in this particular instance, Barrett correctly dissented because she didn't want to be embarrassed and she knew Roberts didn't need her vote because he had Kavanaugh's vote. So the Thomas's dissent is righteous, but you knew where the case was going to go because the first 5 pages is a paean to the wonderful, wonderful nature of central banks. I mean, it was not the most egregious propagandist of the Federal Reserve and central banks could not have written this decision any better. It was, you could see how Roberts says, "Oh yes, the great central bank," and in the context of doing so, he just lies about the whole history of it. He pretends it's deeply rooted in America. Deeply rooted in America. We had no central bank of any meaningful kind until 1913. The first bank and the second bank were meant to service the U.S. government, not all this other stuff. We didn't have controlled currency controls even. Yeah, the great Ron Paul end the Fed, audit the Fed, all of that. And so this deference to this bankster co-option and coup of I'm waiting for them to praise the CIA in the same way. I mean, it's so over the top. And you get a nature of so they make up a fake history, claim it's connected to constitutional founding when it's not, claim that the central bank is just like the first bank and the second bank of the United States when it's not. They suggest Jackson committed a horrible crime against the wonders of financial stability by refusing to renew the second bank's charter when it was one of the most popular things that he did. They ignore what Thomas Jefferson said about central banks. So the banks that we had were limited in scale and scope at the beginning of the country, nowhere like the Federal Reserve. They just lie about that. They ignore that from the time Jackson said no until 1913, almost a century of American history, there was no bank of any kind, no national bank of any kind. That was just a invention of elites that was so unpopular, it was never even continued in its very constrained and constricted form. And then they pretend that access to they recognize in the other decision we'll get to, the FTC decision, that there's no such thing as a right of private property interest in public office. You can't have personal property from a public office.
That was Clarence Thomas's dissent, where he basically says it's a government job. You have no personal property rights in a government job or any public position. The majority didn't address that, right? I mean, not that they have to respond to the dissent.
Not only that, not only they make up a fake history in general, they pretend that only one founder mattered. Not the founding generation of Americans that really made America legally binding, consistent to the very philosophical foundation of the country, of the consent of the governed and the people are sovereign. But they don't talk about Thomas Jefferson's view. They don't talk about George Washington's views. They don't talk about George Mason's views. They don't talk about a wide range of founding even elites. Instead, they only cite one for the idea that a central bank was a part of our constitutional core, which is absurd. Why isn't it in the Constitution then? Is Alexander Hamilton, who, by the way, he was kind of a foreigner himself. That's a whole other story, bastard kid and all the rest. But lefty Democrats say, "Oh, I love my little Alexander Hamilton dancing around." If you know the populist history of that, opposition to Alexander Hamilton was very broadly popular. He wanted an industrial plan, a centralized government, a nationalized government. So his ideas were rejected by the founding generation in election after election. And then you get a sense of it. They then cite, I think, his son. His son is like a nobody. Wrote some notes on it. And they even have a footnote. Gives you an idea who Roberts is. Did you know that his son was one of America's first great yachters? He was one of the first great yachtmen of America. They give you an idea. This guy belongs in England, not in America. And pre-revolutionary England, no less. That's who Roberts is. You don't have to have any conspiracy to understand this is who Roberts always was. He was part of the country club aristocracy. He likes to vacation with the Epstein class in Paris. That's who he is. So no surprise, they're finally documenting some of his corruption is starting to sneak out. I knew about this 20 years ago because I was approached by people connected to Robert's wife about how maybe this case can go away. Maybe that case can go away. Maybe you need to hire his wife with a substantial salary retainer that is way in excess of any hours she'll ever work. I mean, that's who, right? He's part of this. That's what people are confused when I reference the Supreme Court, some of this court's decisions as of the Epstein class, by the Epstein class, for the Epstein class. This pay into the Federal Reserve is exactly that. Then you have the right and righteous dissent of the only justice on the Supreme Court with any working class biography and background and history. It was heavily influenced by his working class black grandfather, Clarence Thomas. And Thomas first points out there can't be a due process violation here because you have no private property interest in public office. That's nuts. Second points out that this is the first injunction of this kind sustained by the Supreme Court in the entire history of the Supreme Court. And he said, kind of odd to call this deeply rooted in history when it's completely AWOL from history and anti-historical. But my favorite part was how much he denounced. One, he exposed how the first and second bank had nothing to do with this central bank. It's radically different and distinct. And even in constricted form was rejected by the voters at the time, which is why it kept getting its charter revoked. But then he goes into great detail about how foreign to America central banks are. That, as he pointed out, it was introduced by Paul Warburg. He was the principal person responsible, along with the Yankee elites. And pointed out he was a German citizen at the time. What, even a U.S. citizen? Yeah, the German citizen wrote this law. And of course, if you're wondering whether Warburg is related to the Rothschilds, the answer is yes. His banking family was deeply entwined. While his family history goes all the way back to Venice, he was at the time in the U.S. His father interned and apprenticed for the Rothschild banking family elites. So that's who literally wrote the Federal Reserve. You couldn't have something that's more anti-founders, anti-American, anti-constitutional than central banksters robbing us of our wealth through their manipulation and monopolization of banking and financial power in the United States. And so just point after point, Thomas just rips through it. Cites people from the Mises Institute, cites some of the great American libertarians, cites some of the great alternative histories exposing the Fed. It's probably the most renowned, it will become one of the most renowned constitutional condemnations of the Federal Reserve in Supreme Court history. I suspect that if you look into the closets of Clarence Thomas, what you will find is never showing up at an Epstein Island, unlike maybe John Roberts. But you'll find some End the Fed T-shirts deservedly placed and present there. So I recommend Thomas's dissent for policy reasons and legal reasons, but also for its great history of who and what the Federal Reserve really is.
Robert, there's two things. I got to bring up some chat here. I didn't get distracted by the chat. I just had to respond to some of it. But I saw a Bitcoin tip come in, and that's going to remind me of what to do. We got Bioman Sam tipped with Rumble Wallet. People, this is the reminder that I always need. Barnes is too small right there. If you're watching on the landing page of Rumble right now, what you got to do is go, I'm going to show you in real time. If you want to support the channel, go click on the video, get into the stream. There you can see it's in the corner there. If you're watching me, and hit the thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel, download Rumble Wallet. It's an amazing product. You can invest in crypto at your own risk and peril, and you can tip with crypto, gold backed, whatever. You go click on the tip thing there, and you can do it. So thank you very much for that and the reminder. But then I also want to get to a couple of other what I think I had to Google seem to be insults. We got Evan626 says, Evan626 says, just started watching. I'm a software engineer at a giant US bank. I applied for Patriot Front and was rejected because I wanted to do too much. The far right is racist and anti-Semitic. I am far right. You're not. I don't think you're proving the point that you think. Your point is they're not feds. They would have accepted me if they were. No, I think I disagree with you. They don't want actually. Well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't. You are not far right. I am. Let me think about that for a bit.
Well, one little added, I forgot the other part of great Thomas's dissent is his wonderful condemnation of Woodrow Wilson. He goes, it's not a coincidence the central bank and the Federal Reserve came in under Woodrow Wilson because he hated ordinary Americans. He believed in elite control, bureaucratic control, aristocratic control, that in the name of progressive cause. No coincidence, Woodrow Wilson's first movie that was ever shown in the White House is Birth of a Nation, the most famous pro-Klan racist movie ever made in American history. That's who Woodrow Wilson was. But it's a wonderful denunciation of Wilson's real legacy, and pointing out that Wilson's legacy was deeply anti-American from a constitutional founding perspective, and that thus the Federal Reserve, just for that reason alone, not just all the others, could not be considered a core institution representing constitutional principles of governance.
I want to bring back up, I meant to get to the Barry N. McGrowan, who saes, Viva Does Barnes shave your back for you? Asking for a friend. I had to Google what this even means. And apparently it's from Mean Girls, and it's intended to body shame. I'll have you know, Barry and McGrowan, I don't have hair on my back. I think it's a sign of evolution. I don't have chest hair. I don't have back hair. I have leg hair. But no, I don't even know what it's supposed to mean. But so no, the answer to that question is a no. I don't have back hair to shave in the first place. And I think that's it right now for good. Okay. While I go verify one thing, Barry N. McGrowan, that name sounds, the user handle sounds familiar. I have to double check. But there's an answer to your question. Thank you for the support, by the way, Robert. So the Fed, they have proprietary, or they have personal property rights in government positions. Can't fire them. Violates the independence of the Federal Reserve. But when it comes to firing Slaughter, she was from the FTC. I forget what she did now. But the bottom line, and this is the obvious, predictable decision, because the FTC is a official federal body, like that's actual federal, and Trump has executive powers to, fire at will members of the executive branch of government. Is there any broader implication of this decision other than just to highlight the hypocrisy in the Lisa Cook Federal Reserve decision?
For a long time, the Supreme Court, under its Humphreys executor decision, had interpreted the bureaucracy as being independent of the elected aspect of the executive branch, which solely and wholly the president. So this is the most dramatic undermining of the administrative state, other than the reversal of the Chevron decision, because it says everybody in the government, except the Federal Reserve, you can fire whenever you want. You don't have to have any cause to fire, because otherwise it undermines constitutional control through the elected executive under Article 2 of the bureaucracy. So this is the good SCOTUS set of cases that start up, and is a huge white pill, because they mention that these executive agencies are meant to be envoys of the president, not in control of the president. I think how they put it, envoys instead of equals. And they'd been treated as equals or sometimes superior. And this completely eradicates that for everything except the Federal Reserve.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So by extension, it means, that the Federal Reserve are not just envoys instead of equals. The Federal Reserve are not envoys. They're not equals. They're basically superiors. I mean, they are exactly unfireable.
Correct. That's how and they issue these decisions within 24 hours of each other. There's no better example of motivated reasoning, no better example of the constitutional inconsistency, of philosophical just frauds that the Supreme Court is, and that particularly Roberts is the leader of, but he can sufficiently get the support of people like either Barrett or Kavanaugh. Barrett more often than Kavanaugh, but as long as he gets one of those two institutionalists to go with him, the three Democrats will be happy to be on board with those kind of decisions. Here, they all agreed that constitutionally you cannot have the elected head of the executive branch, who's the only executive official identified in the Constitution, to be stripped of his executive control and executive power based on, they used to make up under Humphrey's executor whether the duties being assigned were legislative or adjudicatory or something like that, as a way to weasel around Article 2's constitutional control by the sole elected official for the federal government. And they acknowledge that's really a bunch of garbage. It's really a bunch of hogwash. It's always really been a bunch of garbage, really always been a bunch of hogwash. And that consequently you cannot impose for-cause limits on the president. Now, there were some justices that concurred, like Thomas concurred in part, but not in every part of it. So it ends up being like a split decision, like something like 4-1-3 decision. Maybe 4-1-1-3, something like that. Because Thomas pointed out that he did not agree with the part of the decision that said, we're not going to answer whether this might apply to certain kinds of unelected judges, unappointed judges by the Senate. They mean magistrates, by the way, or other particular unique circumstances. Because Thomas is like, there are no unique circumstances. It has to be the elected head of the executive branch that controls the executive branch. Otherwise, we have a fourth branch of government called the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And so it erases most of the power of the bureaucracy to be immune from executive elected control, which is where the dual state construct applied to the deep state from the get-go, which was, late 19th century, sophisticated folks in England. So it wasn't like some crazy conspiracy theory. You're talking about editors of The Economist, old institutional publications. We're saying there's a dual state that appears to emerge where the government continues to function in the same way, regardless of what voters want. And then you apply that dual state construct to the law enforcement, national security, military intelligence apparatus, and you get a deep state because of the scale of its influence and the coercive character it can impose. But the whole constant legal foundation for it was the idea that these were equals rather than envoys. And the Supreme Court erased that. Finally, after almost a century, got rid of that garbage decision. And that really deep, between this and the Enron case, undermines the legal power of the bureaucracy as long as you're not a central bank. If you're a central bank, you're exempt from all of it.
What do we move on? How many cases do we have left? We've got a bunch that were not taken up.
Yeah, and some of those are shorter. The biggest ones are the trans participation in women's sports, the Fourth Amendment, and geofencing, and and then we have like the quicker ones are the vaccine mandates, defamation, qualified immunity, free speech on campus. But the other big one is election funding. How that process works.
Okay, so I mean, this is the one where I also sort of I'm having I tried to bone up as much as I could on the decision. I understood what was it, Citizens United. I don't understand. I didn't understand this decision. Basically, that this was a decision that eliminated the limits of coordinated spending between the federal and the state level when it came to campaigning, and I guess I have trouble understanding from a practical point of view if there are limits on individual contributions, but that doesn't apply to PACs and super PACs, and the implication that this is going to have in terms of the federal elections or campaign spending versus state. I mean, I basically have difficulty understanding this decision even after reading analyses to try to figure it out. So try to make it make sense for those of us who don't understand this or the implications of this.
There's a part of this I don't share, which is the idea that you can collectively aggregate campaign funds under some corporate structure and have identical rights as individuals. The part I agree with is that that limiting individuals' spending on speech is limiting their speech. If you had a money exception, like some of my friends on the left and even a few on the right believe, I get the problem they're worried about, which is so much money flooding into our political system that it contaminates and corrupts it to such a degree you're not getting an informed electorate making a decision that is truly consistent with their actual underlying values. That's an understandable concern. I think as a practical matter, whenever you impose all this regulatory infrastructure upon it, what you're going to end up with is the corrupt elites are still going to find ways to get money into the system. And the ordinary person is the one and everyday people and organized groups of popular support will be the ones that actually get limited in their ability to influence the elections. So
just on a simple level, like I appreciate those arguments. Like if you limit it here, they'll find the corruption another way. But if the argument is that spending is speech, then it effectively means that the rich have more speech rights than the poor, or the Elon Musk, who can now spend limitlessly, effectively, has more speech rights. And so I don't know how you equalize that rights because, in theory, the freedom of speech, it needs to be equal among all people. But if spending is considered to be speech protected by the same freedom of speech, then you certainly have an inequality and not an inequity.
Right. The equality of speech is not constitutionally compelled. The other way I look at it from a policy perspective, so the constitutional argument is it's inconsequential to the Constitution because you have the opportunity of speech free from government intrusion or oppression, but no entitlement to equality of speech in that context. The policy implications are, I fear far more a regulatory infrastructure that says I can limit your money that you spend on speech, even if I can't limit the speech itself, because I know you could effectively erase speech because you usually have to spend some sort of money to get your speech out there into the court of public opinion. And so I far more fear the state's intrusion and bureaucratic control than the inequality of access to the political system through disparate resource components. Though I think some of that you could resolve by distinguishing individuals from corporations. But the foundation of the case is a combination of Supreme Court cases, including Buckley and Citizens United, and then a few other decisions in between, which they partially reversed or fully reversed in this case, which is they've long said that since they said the premise is speech is money equals speech, and this is core speech, core First Amendment rights because it concerns elections to office, in order to justify any state or federal regulation or restriction, it needs to be narrowly tailored. It needs to be a compelling government interest. It needs to be the mechanism being chosen narrowly tailored to that compelling government interest. So I think their exact words was it needs to be proportional, necessary, and narrowly tailored. And what they have said in the past is that the only legitimacy is actual quid pro quo corruption or the appearance thereof. And so what's been the case in the past is that you couldn't subvert that by coordinating between the PACs, the party, and the individual. Now, this didn't address PACs. It only addressed parties. And it said that as long as the money isn't earmarked for a particular candidate when donated, and then you can now coordinate between the party and the candidate. Because they said the whole point of the party is to make sure that candidate of their party wins. Mm-hmm. So that restricting, and they said there's alternatives that are more narrowly tailored and equally effective for the purpose of preventing the appearance of quid pro quo corruption, which is the earmarking principle and complete disclosure. And their point is they prefer, from a constitutional perspective, disclosure over bans. Now, I've long advocated for maximum disclosure. Said that voters should know who's spending what on whom, with potential criminal remedies applicable to individuals who violate it, because civil remedies don't work because these PACs appear. And see, this is where I prefer individual, not considering corporations equal to individuals when it comes to any constitutional right or remedy, because corporations are literally privileges of the state. That's their whole origin, their whole history. And to treat them as identical to individuals, you create a lot of the policy problems present. So, for example, if it's an individual, then you could civilly sue them for any violation. You could hold them accountable financially. But in the corporate form, you're limited to the corporate assets. And the corporate assets of campaign committees will disappear usually as soon as the election is over. I mean, this was the concern that the former Senate candidate and former Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore had in Alabama, that it was a political committee that defamed him. And he was like, if they had to post a bond, he goes, if you let them release the bond, it won't matter if I win on appeal to the Supreme Court because the money will be gone. The money isn't gone or is easily gone when it's individual accountability rather than corporate structured limits on that accountability. So part of, I think, the worst consequences from a policy perspective of this election funding analysis, when combined with the corporate immunity that has been extended by the Supreme Court effectively by treating them as indistinguishable to individuals, that's when you get the worst policy combination of impact. But I fundamentally have always agreed the idea that money is speech because it's almost impossible in the everyday world. For example, do you pay for internet service? Okay, boom. I'll say, I'm not banning your speech. I'm just saying it's now a crime to spend money to access the internet. It's a crime to spend money to broadcast through the internet. It's a crime to spend money on a microphone or a megaphone at a local rally. It's a crime to spend money on publishers. It's a crime to spend money on books. They actually did this to Peter Schiff's father, Erwin Schiff. They said, whoa, we're not prohibiting his book. We're just saying he can't receive any money or spend any money connected to his book. It was effectively banning his book. So I'm much more concerned about how the state might misuse this and abuse this than the acknowledged policy problem, but less risky to our liberties of the disparate wealth having disparate influence. And in truth, this falls back on the ordinary American citizen. If you're so lazy, you're not engaged in understanding what's happening with a voter or candidate, then at some level, that's on you. You've got to be an informed citizen and take the efforts to do so.
No, but Robert, the problem is about an uninformed or ill-informed citizen is that problem's on those who are informed. The mass majority, I think, are very less informed. And so the problem is that most people don't know about the ins and outs of this and will be easily manipulated by the coordinated, limitless spending now that seems to have been green-lighted.
Yeah, the only side of it's not. This is only party spending. So all they've said is that the party can coordinate with a candidate, and it doesn't have to be completely independent. So they have not said so and that none of the money can be earmarked, so that it can't be a disguised bribe or perceived bribe in the way it's going on. So so it doesn't apply to super PACs, doesn't apply to PACs, just applies to the party. But the other side of that, to the question of the broader policy ramifications in terms of public responsibility, is a constitutional republic ceases to work when people don't do their own independent investigation and take it upon themselves to learn as much as they can about a candidate. I'm more concerned about transparency, accountability, and accessibility. If you can make sure that candidates who qualify for the ballot have some degree of accessibility where the ordinary person can find what their ideas and ideals are, and what policies they promote or support, then it reduces the risk of big money distorting elections. But that risk is probably still less consequential than giving the government the power to prohibit speech in the name of just prohibiting spending.
What do we move? Do we do the geofencing, or is there no?
Yeah,
better
geofencing
segue?
is good decision. The trans decision is a good decision. So those are two of the. We're on the good SCOTUS side of the equation.
Well, there's only a few of them. Before we head into the after party, we're going to read all of the tipped questions on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I'm routinely checking CombiTube to make sure I'm not missing anything. The geofencing case is very interesting. So, what state was it? I'm forgetting the state right now. The bottom line, there was an armed robbery in I forget where it was right now, and they didn't have a suspect.
Thought it was Virginia. I thought.
It doesn't really matter anyhow. The bottom line is what they did in terms of accessing cell phone data by going to Google and asking them to give basically the cell information anonymized on everyone within the area of the robbery within a certain period of time. So they go and they petition Google to say, give us all of the data on all of the cell phones in the area, anonymized. We don't need to know who it was, and then we're going to refine our searches to narrow it down to certain cell phone whatever that were in the area within the relevant time frame. They narrow it down to, I think it was 3 or 4, at which point the authorities asked Google to de-anonymize the cell data. And they come down on an individual who did. I mean, I had to double check. The guy pleaded guilty. There was a word for it. It was not
conditional plea.
Conditional plea. He pleaded guilty subject to the challenge of the constitutionality of the evidence that they procured. But with that evidence that they procured, they found, I think, $100,000 in his vehicle or at his place. The guy who they geolocated was the one who did it. And people are going to say, well, if you don't break any crimes, break any laws, you have nothing to worry about. He challenged the admissibility of that particular evidence, but ultimately pleaded guilty. He's serving a long time. I think it's 12 years. And they came down and basically concluded that asking or obtaining the data from that type of generalized, search warrant, which encompasses everything and everybody, is a violation of the 14th Amendment, Robert? 4th, damn it. 14th, I think. No, what's the 14th?
What is the 4th is applied to states, is applied through the 14th Amendment.
Okay, that's what I meant, everybody. When I do my test, we'll see how I do. I think I'm getting there. The unreasonable search and seizure, 4th Amendment. And so the court basically said, you need to get a proper warrant. Oh, there was the good faith exception as to whether or not they were going to allow this evidence notwithstanding the constitutional challenge. And by and large, they're going to allow it on the good faith exception, which is, if I didn't misunderstand, it's the authorities were relying on in good faith on a warrant that was legitimately issued lawfully by a judge, even if it's subsequently declared to be unconstitutional. But they basically said these dragnet, getting all cell data of everybody within an area without a specific warrant signed off violates unreasonable search and seizures. It will have zero impact in the conditional guilty plea in this case, but at least it now sets the precedent. This guy will go to jail for 12 years and say, well, at least I fought for the rights of people not to have their cell data unreasonably searched and seized. The question is, what are the broader impacts that this is going to have on law enforcement, and what methods to bypass this? I call it an illusory sort of restriction. It feels illusory. I don't know how they're going to find other ways to get exactly what they want. And at the end of the day, they're going to have flock cameras at the corner of every street anyhow. So they'll have the license plate numbers, which you're going to say, I have no argument to say they can't be scanned in public when you're on public roads using public roads. So It's a good white pill. I feel it's illusory, and that the government is going to implement or already has implemented runarounds or bypasses to this. What's your take on the decision?
I think constitutionally, this is one of the more consequential constraints on the incoming and incipient surveillance state. And because they needed the third party doctrine, which said that if you share information with a third party, it's no longer private information within the meaning of the protection of the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches or seizures. And here the court said, no, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your location history because it's almost the essential to everyday life. And you don't expect your location history to be shared with the whole world simply because you use a mobile phone. So it's precluding the use of the new technologies as an end round from constitutional constraint and scrutiny on searches and seizures by government officials, whether in a civil or criminal context. So that was very big. Basically, it's geofencing, as they call it. So you within tell me everybody's how many phones were within this 150 meter range or whatever it was. Tell me, and then you once you get back that information, you might extend. You might say, well, give me these particular phones for a broader, longer period of time, and then de-anonymize it so that you can effectively know exactly who that was. And the government was literally arguing that this was not even a search. So that and part of their argument was no reasonable expectation of privacy. Another part was the third party exception, which they've used to allow searches and seizures and summonses and subpoenas of bank records, telephone records, medical records in certain contexts, wide range of stuff that the ordinary person clearly considers part of within their reasonable expectation of privacy. So it was a good expansion of the reasonable expectation of privacy for ordinary, everyday, essential use against the would-be invasion by the surveillance state.
And I just had to double check. License plate readers are considered constitutional, Robert, correct? Under the Fourth Amendment?
A lot of places that and flock cameras are subject to a wide range of ongoing cases. And so I don't think maybe they have back in the time, but I'm not sure if the Supreme Court said it's okay to look at a license plate. But if you have cameras getting it 24/7, that I don't think yet has, because the flock camera use is just going through the court system.
And I guess the precedent with it's the police scanner. So if the police are just scanning cars and license plate, that's not surveillance or as invasive.
They pointed out if you had a cop following somebody, that would not be invasive. But something as whenever the surveillance state gets your data and mass gathers it, and then allows the state to, without a warrant, and search it in often unreasonable manners, and those without particularity and probable cause, then it becomes a general search. It becomes a search, first of all. It becomes a general search, second of all. And both of those are disfavored under the Constitution, if not with a warrant, and if not independently reasonable. Now, Gorsuch went further, and he's encouraging people to expand their understanding of the Fourth Amendment. And he's like, the words say anything that, your papers and effects. And so that your effects include anything that's part of personal property. And so he considers it a parallel independent reason to challenge this. He's like, the Fourth Amendment should not be limited to reasonable expectation of privacy. That's an understandable application of it, but it's only a partial application of it. And if they're seizing any aspects. And so he would, for example, like to erase the third party exception altogether. It's like people don't really think their bank records are in public view. They don't really think their health or medical records are in public view. They don't really think their phone records are in public view. And he goes, consequently, it should be, is that their part of their effect, something they have a personal proprietary interest in at some level? Because we recognize hacking as illegal invasions of people's privacy. So why is it that the same thing with bank records or phone records or medical records, and that we need to return to a much more robust Fourth Amendment? Then, unfortunately, of course, Barrett was on the wrong side. Shock, shock. But Alito and Thomas, God bless them. Thomas and Gorsuch are my two favorite justices on the court. But the one weakness, in my opinion, with Thomas's application is kind of like the people who criticized my belief in the Constitution applying even to Carmelo Anthony. God bless them, but they really, when they see it's a criminal defendant, It's like the Constitution disappears in their brains for a little while because I don't agree with their dissents on this case. What they would have done would have greenlit the whole power of the surveillance state. And they would have an adjudication was the guy guilty? Screw him. I mean, that's just their tendencies in those cases. Especially of late, Thomas didn't always was this way, but and this is like when people were commenting on black jurors. It's like Thomas comes from a long line within the black community of being even tougher on what they consider bad behavior, improper behavior within their own community than others are. That represents that, and he's becoming like his grandfather in his older age. And so, in 80% of the time, it's awesome because he's returning to traditional and original principles. 20% of the time, it's like screw that criminal. And I get the natural.
Well, I do have to tell you, like, when I found out the guy, it actually succeeded in locating the criminal. Then people are going to be a little bit more amenable to say, well, if they had gotten the wrong guy, then obviously this is a violation. But they got the right guy, so
Yeah.
But is it admissible?
It's what true constitutional conservatives will often say is consequentialism, and say we don't adopt constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is contradicted to consequentialism. That the Constitution is about the principles. The other factor is, remember, this power is probably used all the time to invade people's privacy. The only people who ever find out about it is people who get criminally prosecuted because they were guilty. For every person that's guilty, they've probably illicitly spied on 100 plus people. And if it was up to the surveillance state, they'd be spying on you daily. So this is a deterrent to that level of spying. Now, we need a robust civil remedy for Fourth Amendment issues. And that will relate to the qualified immunity case we'll talk about. But I think what we can do is we'll save all those for the after party, except for the vaccine immunity case. We'll cover that here and then go over to the after party for death penalty, defamation, Dershowitz, a speech on school campuses and on men and women's sports will be at the after party. Last one here will be on a disturbing rejection of cert on the certiorari on vaccine mandates and religious and overt open discrimination. And it rebuts a bunch of fake conservatives who are attacking me, saying the Trump administration was online with making a very reasonable interpretation and asked for this cert to be rejected. Well, tell that to Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas, because they agree with me and disagree with those fake conservatives.
I'll just say thank who is it? Classic Metal Show for the raid. We're gonna do. Why do you get so small, Robert? When I do this, we're gonna you'll do the vaccine one. We're gonna then we're gonna go over to vivabarneslaw.locals.com, read all the tipped questions there. In the interim, while Robert does the last case across all the platforms, everyone bear in mind. I'll give you the link. Everything goes up, including the after party, on to Spotify podcasts. So for those who are not Rumble Premium members or not members of vivabarneslaw.locals.com, you can complain all you want. We do things to thank the people who...
Why are you not a member of vivabarneslaw.locals.com? Why are you abusing yourself? Why are you denying yourself? I mean, do you got some sort of religious tradition where you must inflict pain upon yourself? You should be a member of vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
It is $10 a month if you want to support. $100 a year. You could also be a non-supporting member, and
you don't even have to pay the subscription. A lot of the stuff is free. Tons of stuff is free that's available on there.
But the bottom line, people say it's behind a paywall. You can watch it tomorrow. We do things to thank the people who actually keep us independent and keep us free to do what we do here. So
we're going to do that right now. You could watch live on vivabarneslaw.locals.com by being an unpaying member. This is one of the shows that's free. So to be a member without being a subscriber, without paying anything, not behind a paywall. If you're at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, so join today. Oh, one last thing. We only got about 20 tickets left, but the July 4th, upon the July 4th anniversary, August 1st, August 2nd, 1776lawcenter.com. So pretty easy to remember right after our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. 1776lawcenter.com. We got only about 20 tickets left for the conference. All the net proceeds go to support 1776 Law Center, which does things like take on the Federal Reserve and support financial freedom, does things like oppose vaccine mandates for medical freedom, supports people like Amish farmer Amos Miller on food freedom, opposes the surveillance state in the cases of political freedom, A guest with Alexander Macoris coming in from London, Alex Christoforou coming in from Cyprus, Larry Johnson coming up, Daniel Davis coming up, Joe Kent is going to try to make it, Judge Napolitano is going to try to make it, Chase Hughes, who's was just on with Joe Rogan about CIA psyops, how to spot them, how to resist them, the Greg Hartley and Scott Rouse of the Behavior Panel, Richard Barris of People's Pundit Daily, Dr. Bowden, the great doctor from Texas, fighting the licensure controls and the sort of medical oligarchy in support of medical freedom. Brooke Jackson, the whistleblower against Pfizer. They're all going to be there. Some people from some prominent congressional staffs are going to be there. We'll probably have a few surprise guests. All there, 2 days, about 20 hours long. Going to have, some high-end chefs are going to be in town that are supporting the cause. Then we got some local food. We're going to make sure we got some Amish food. Going to have some Amos Miller food. Going to have some King of Biltong food. So all that 1776lawcenter.com. Once we're capped, we're capped, and we only got about 20 tickets left. So if you want to come, get those tickets today.
And I'm going to see who do we raid. While I look for that, Robert. So I know you're personally miffed, vexed by this refusal to take up a case for obvious reasons. Tell the world about it, and they can judge your wrath and your rage accordingly.
Well, what's interesting is the first justice to start being skeptical of COVID emergency controls is the libertarian inclined justice, the best of Trump's appointees, Justice Gorsuch. What is nice is recently Justice Thomas has been joining Justice Gorsuch. Now Justice Alito joined it, which means we are one justice short from cert being granted. Who might Justice Barrett, who loved the Jacobson decision, the foundation of the trilogy of infamy. It, along with the Buck's decision on eugenics, along with the Korematsu decision that said if your granddaddy came from the wrong country, we could take away all your rights and relief and remedy. The foundation of that being the Jacobson decision, which allowed vaccine mandates of a kind, but only a small fine, back in 1905, was the foundation, the only case cited for the Buck's eugenics case, and one of the principal doctrines cited for the Korematsu case. So this was in New York. They passed a law saying you could not provide, and we discussed this before, religious objections to vaccine mandates. So a bunch of healthcare workers who are on the front lines of protecting people during COVID, the people who had long-standing religious objections to vaccines, who wanted to control their own body and have bodily autonomy, were being denied systematically any religious accommodation because the state of New York had banned those religious accommodations and imposed, and it created, even in the federal civil rights context, a undue hardship is what the courts were saying. It'd be an undue hardship to comply with federal law to provide a religious accommodation because state law prohibited religious objections to be granted. This was the decision that the Trump administration betrayed Maha on, because it intervened at the last minute and said, no, justices, don't take up this case. And I said at the time that was a betrayal of Maha, that what it was intended to do was allow local and state governments to create an automatic, de facto, undue hardship claim that would allow the ordinary individual to never be able to successfully sue either the government or corporations under the guise that this was an undue hardship to comply with federal civil rights law. It undermines and usurps the whole purpose and point of federal civil rights laws. And that's what Justice Gorsuch said. That's what Justice Thomas said. That's what Justice Alito said. A bunch of fake but the con and conservative were running around pretending that this Trump administration position was identical and mirrored the people who opposed vaccine mandates, when that was a flat-out fraud and lie. And take no less of a word from it than Justice Gorsuch, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito, the only constitutionally consistent conservatives on the bench in 80% of cases.
Robert, we're going to go raid Eric John Pizza, who is doing, it's totally different people. If you don't want, there's other political stuff to watch, go check out Eric John Pizza. It's a fitting person to raid for the evening. Come on over to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I'm going to read all the chat, all the tip questions there. And we're going to cover the last decisions. The trans one, I'll clip it as well, but we got a bunch of the not taking up cert in the death penalty case in Texas. I found that to be particularly interesting.
Didn't take up the cert for Dershowitz's defamation claim. Didn't take up cert for a First Amendment school speech claim. Didn't take up first for a horrendous qualified immunity decision. didn't take up cert in the death penalty discrimination case. And then we'll cover the men and women's sports, a very impactful Title IX case, a very impactful equal protection case, and in particular, something that we previewed years ago, Bostock case, where Justice Gorsuch got a lot of heat. And I was saying, if you read through his opinion, you realize it was a very limited interpretation of a statute, and that he would never have any such intention of applying it outside of that particular and unique context. And he makes that crystal clear in his concurrence in that case. All of that at the after party at Viva Barnes, which you can join right now if you want at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, or if you're on Rumble Premium, or if you just watch or listen to it tomorrow on Spotify.
Boom. There's a link to everybody. And now we're going to update the stream. And I think everything else is going to be automatic. Let's do that.